Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I still get chills thinking about what happened last October. It's been almost a year, but I can't shake the feeling of being watched whenever I'm in the woods now. I've gone hunting my whole life, spent countless nights in the backcountry, and never once felt uncomfortable until that night near Cadiman. My Uncle Dave has this old beat-up camper we've used for hunting trips since I was a teenager. Nothing fancy, just a small aluminum box with bunks, a tiny propane stove, and enough space to keep us out of the elements. We'd planned this elk hunt for months, taking a week off in early October to hit the mountains near Jasper Park. There's this spot on Crown land my uncle's been hunting for 20 years, a big gravel pit about 40 minutes down a logging road that branches off just before you reach Cadiman proper. It's remote as hell, the kind of place where you don't see another soul for days. Perfect elk country, with meadows opening up onto old cut blocks and valleys that funnel the herds through predictable routes during rut season. We arrived on a Monday afternoon, set up camp in the gravel pit, and spent the remaining daylight scouting. The first thing we always do is put up our meat pole, basically just a strong rope strung between two trees where we can hang an animal after field dressing. It keeps the meat clean and away from predators. My uncle is obsessive about proper game handling, so we'd set up our pole about 30 yards from the camper, using this big, sturdy spruce and an old shed as our anchor points. The first 3 days were frustrating. We saw tons of sign, fresh droppings, rubs on trees where bulls had scraped their antlers, even caught the scent of elk several times. But we couldn't close the deal. I had one shot opportunity on the second day, but held off because the bull was too far for a clean kill. My uncle always taught me that a bad shot is worse than no shot at all. On the third night, we got back to camp exhausted. We'd covered nearly 15 miles that day, climbing ridges and dropping into valleys, trying to pattern the herds. After a simple dinner of instant mashed potatoes and canned stew, my uncle crashed hard around 9. I stayed up reading my book with my headlamp for a while, but finally turned in around 11. I don't know what woke me up. Some hunter's instinct, maybe. According to my watch, it was around 2 in the morning when I first heard it. Rocks being knocked together outside. Not like random stones tumbling down a slope, but deliberate. 2 distinct clacks, like someone was trying to make a signal. At first, I thought maybe some other hunters had come into the area and were trying to locate each other in the dark. But we hadn't seen a single vehicle on that road in 3 days. Plus, who the hell would be hunting in the pitch black? I lay there in my sleeping bag, perfectly still, just listening. After about a minute of silence, I heard breathing, deep, heavy breathing right outside the camper window. Not like a deer or elk. This was deeper, more resonant. Like something with massive lungs was standing just a few feet away from my head. The camper has these tiny sliding windows next to each bunk. Mine was cracked open about an inch for fresh air. I slowly turned toward it, not making a sound, and peered through the small opening. There was a quarter moon that night, just enough to see silhouettes against the tree line. That's when I saw it. Something huge and dark was standing near our meat pole. At first, I thought it might be a bear. We get plenty of black bears, and even the occasional grizzly in that area. But this was different. It was standing upright, completely vertical, and it was massive, taller than the shed it was standing beside. As I watched, frozen in place, it bent down to sniff at the ground where we'd cleaned our boots earlier that day. When it bent over, I could see its back and shoulders in the moonlight. Jesus Christ, it was wide, wider than the shed, with what looked like dark fur covering its body. I could make out patches of grey or silver on its back where the moonlight caught it. My heart was hammering so hard I was afraid it would hear me. I tried to wake my uncle without making too much noise. "Dave," I whispered, reaching across to shake his shoulder. "There's something outside." He mumbled something and rolled over. Before I could try again, the creature outside made a huffing sound, like it was angry or frustrated. Then it grabbed the meat pole, a rope strung between two trees about 8 feet off the ground, and shook it violently. The rope snapped with a sharp twang that echoed through the quiet night. That noise finally woke my uncle. He sat up abruptly, banging his head on the upper storage compartment. "What the hell was that?" he started to say, but before he could finish, something hit the side of the camper, hard. The whole vehicle rocked from side to side, and I heard the aluminum siding buckle slightly from the impact. Jesus Christ! My uncle fumbled for the flashlight he keeps next to his bunk. "What's out there?" "I don't know," I whispered, though by this point I had a terrible suspicion. "It's huge. I thought it was a bear at first, but it's standing upright. It broke the meat pole." We could hear heavy footsteps circling the camper now. The gravel crunched under its weight with each step. My uncle tried to look out his window, but as soon as he moved the curtain, something slammed against the back window hard enough to crack the glass. We both jumped back. Then came a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. A deep guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the entire camper. It wasn't like any bear or cougar I'd ever heard. It was almost human, but not quite. Lower, more primitive. I could feel it in my chest, like when you stand too close to the speakers at a concert. "Get your boots on," my uncle whispered, reaching for his rifle. "And your coat. If it tries to get in, we need to be ready." We fumbled in the dark, trying to dress quickly while staying as quiet as possible. Outside, the creature continued to circle. It would stop occasionally, and we could hear it sniffing loudly, like it was trying to catch our scent through the thin walls of the camper. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it seemed to lose interest. We heard heavy footsteps moving away from the camper, branches breaking as it pushed through the underbrush at the edge of the gravel pit. Before it disappeared completely, we heard several rocks being thrown, not at us, but through the bush, like it was throwing a tantrum as it left. Neither of us slept after that. We sat in that dark camper with our rifles across our laps until the first hint of dawn appeared. Only then did we venture outside, and even then, we moved like we were in hostile territory, back to back, scanning the tree line constantly. In the grey morning light, we found the tracks. They were pressed into the gravel around the camper, huge impressions that looked vaguely foot-shaped, but were longer than my uncle's size. 12 boots and wide, almost like snowshoes. Where the ground was softer near the edge of the pit, the impressions were clearer. 5 distinct toes, a deep arch, and a wide heel. The meat pole was completely destroyed. The heavy rope had been snapped clean through, and one of the trees it had been tied to, a young spruce about 6 inches in diameter, was partially uprooted, leaning at a 45-degree angle. But the strangest thing was what we found jabbed into the ground next to it. A spruce branch about 4 feet long had been ripped off a nearby tree and jammed vertically into the dirt, right where the meat would have hung if we'd gotten an elk, like some kind of warning sign. My uncle stood there looking at those tracks for a long time without saying anything. Finally he said, "I've heard stories from some of the old trappers who used to work these mountains. Never believed them until now." We packed up in record time. Didn't even bother with breakfast or coffee, just threw everything into the truck and got the hell out of there. I remember looking back as we drove away, half expecting to see something watching us from the tree line, but there was nothing visible. We drove straight to Hinton and got a motel room, spent the night there, then headed home a day early. We told everyone we'd gotten skunked on the hunt and decided to cut our losses. I haven't told many people what really happened. Who'd believe it? But I know what I saw. That massive silhouette against the moonlight, the incredible strength it showed breaking that rope and shaking the camper, those tracks in the gravel. I've spent my whole life in the woods, and I know the difference between a bear and what we encountered that night. There's a word for it, of course, Sasquatch.Bigfoot. But saying it out loud still feels ridiculous, even after what I experienced. All I know is that something walked into our camp that night that shouldn't exist according to science. Something intelligent enough to check our meat pole for food, angry enough to destroy it when it found nothing, and deliberate enough to leave what felt like a warning. I went back to those woods this summer, in daylight, with 3 friends, told them I wanted to scout for this fall's hunt. But really I needed to see the place again, to convince myself I hadn't imagined it all. The gravel pit looked smaller in the summer sun, ordinary. The spruce tree had straightened itself up. There were no tracks, no signs of what had happened. But standing there, I felt it again, that bone-deep certainty that we're not alone in the wilderness, that something watches from the shadows, something that walks on 2 legs but isn't human, something that's been there long before us and will remain long after we're gone. I'm going hunting again this fall, different spot this time, far from Cadman, but I'll be looking over my shoulder a lot more, and I don't think I'll be using a meat pole anymore. Story 2. I've never told this story online before. Hell, I've barely told it to anyone at all. For a military man, credibility is everything, and this isn't exactly the kind of experience that builds it, but it's been eating at me for years now, and I need to get it out somewhere people might actually listen instead of just nodding politely while thinking I've lost my mind. This happened back in 1992 when I was stationed at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base in South Carolina. I was a security forces officer, what civilians would call military police, and I was working the graveyard shift that night. It was late October, unseasonably warm, but with this crisp breeze that made the air feel electric somehow. The kind of night where everything seems sharper, more in focus. My patrol route that night included what we called the Serpentine, this winding security road that ran along the perimeter of the base. One side was chain-link fence topped with razor wire, the other side was dense South Carolina forest. Not the prettiest duty post, but usually quiet. The moon was nearly full that night, lighting everything up almost like daytime. I remember thinking how beautiful it was, in that eerie way full moons can be when they're hanging low in the sky. I'd been driving with my headlights on as per protocol, but the moonlight was so bright it was actually hurting my night vision. This might sound strange to civilians, but sometimes you can see better in low light conditions without artificial light blasting everything out. So I switched off my headlights for a stretch, just letting my eyes adjust to the natural moonlight. The forest was making those normal nighttime sounds. Crickets, the occasional rustle of small animals, branches creaking in the wind. Nothing unusual. I'd driven maybe a quarter mile with the lights off when I approached a section where the Serpentine curved sharply around a drainage ditch, a pretty significant one, probably 14 to 16 feet across and about 8 feet deep. Standard procedure was to slow down around that curve, so I did. As I rounded the bend, something felt off, hard to explain, but the forest had gone completely silent. No crickets, no rustling, nothing, just dead quiet. The hair on my arms stood up, and I got that feeling you get when someone's watching you. I flipped my headlights back on, and there it was, about 40 feet ahead of me, caught mid-stride crossing the road, was something. Something massive. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was bipedal, walking on 2 legs like a human, but there was nothing human about it. The thing was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, with light brown hair covering its entire body. Not fur exactly, more like, hell, I don't know how to describe it. Longer hair, but not shaggy, more uniform. The creature froze for just a split second when my headlights hit it, just long enough for me to take in its massive frame. Broad shoulders, long arms, thick torso. If I had to guess, it weighed at least 400 pounds, maybe 450. The proportions were all wrong for a human. Its arms were too long, hanging down past what would be its knees, and its legs, they were powerful, like tree trunks. Here's the part that still fucks with me to this day. This thing, this massive, heavy creature, reacted with a speed and agility that shouldn't have been possible for something that size. It didn't turn and run away from me down the road. It didn't crash back into the woods on the forest side. Instead, in one fluid motion, it leapt across that drainage ditch. We're talking about a 14 to 16-foot jump done from a standstill by something weighing at least 400 pounds. And it cleared that ditch effortlessly, like it was stepping over a crack in the sidewalk. It didn't scramble up the other side or struggle to get purchase. It landed perfectly on the other side and disappeared into the tree line in seconds. My military training kicked in and I hit the brakes. My hand was already reaching for my sidearm, but by the time I stopped the vehicle, the creature was gone, completely vanished into the woods. No sound of it crashing through the underbrush, no branches breaking, nothing, just gone, like a ghost. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, my heart hammering in my chest, trying to process what I'd just seen. I kept my weapon drawn, scanning the tree line, but there was nothing. Part of me wanted to call it in immediately, but another part, the rational part, knew exactly how that would sound over the radio. So I gathered myself, holstered my weapon, and continued my patrol. I drove extra slow, scanning both sides of the road obsessively. Every shadow looked like it might be that thing waiting to jump out. Every rustle in the bushes made me flinch, but I didn't see it again. When I got back to the security building at the end of my shift, I was still shaking. My flight chief, Staff Sergeant Dawson, noticed right away. He was a 20-year veteran, seen-it-all type who didn't miss much. "Mercer, you look like you've seen a ghost," he said, giving me this concerned look. "Everything okay out there?" I hesitated. In the military, especially in security roles, your reputation is everything. Start talking about seeing monsters in the woods, and you might as well kiss your career goodbye. But Dawson was a good guy, someone I trusted. So I told him, laid it all out. The creature, its size, how it moved, everything. To his credit, he didn't laugh or roll his eyes. He listened, asked a few questions about specifics, and then leaned back in his chair with this thoughtful expression. "Look, Mercer," he finally said, "I'm not saying I don't believe you. Strange things happen out there, especially at night. But I'm going to give you some advice, as someone who's been around a lot longer than you have." He glanced around to make sure no one else was in earshot. "Don't put this in the blotter." The blotter was our official record of all security incidents during a shift. Everything went in there: trespassers, gate issues, even animals on the runway. "Sir?" I remember being confused. Reporting unusual activity was protocol. "I'm serious. You write down that you saw an 8-foot-tall creature jumping across drainage ditches, and that report follows you for the rest of your career. Best case, people think you fell asleep on duty and had a dream. Worst case, they start questioning your mental fitness for service." He wasn't wrong. The military isn't exactly known for its open-mindedness about unexplained phenomena. "What do I say happened on patrol then?" I asked. "Say you saw what looked like a large animal, possibly a bear, near the perimeter fence. You investigated, found nothing unusual, and continued your patrol. That's it." So that's what I did. I wrote up the sanitized version for the official record. But I knew what I saw wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand upright and walk on 2 legs for extended periods. They don't have that body shape, and they sure as hell don't leap 14-foot ditches from a standing position. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the encounter in my head, trying to rationalize it. Could it have been a man in a suit? No way. The proportions were all wrong, and no human could move like that. A bear? Definitely not. Some other animal? Nothing in South Carolina gets that big or moves that way. The next few nights on patrol, I brought a camera with me. Kept my headlights off more often, scanning the tree line, hoping to see it again, and dreading it at the same time. But I never did. Whatever it was gone. Or at least, it was smart enough to avoid me. I stayed at Myrtle Beach AFB for another year before being transferred, and I never saw anything like that again. But I've spoken to other military personnel over the years, carefully, always carefully, and I've heard similar stories. Security officers at remote installations, patrol units on training exercises in wooded areas, pilots who've seen things from the air that don't match any known animal. Most keep quiet for the same reason I did. Who wants to be the crazy guy who sees monsters? It wasn't until years later that I started researching and came across accounts of Bigfoot sightings. The descriptions matched what I saw: the height, the build, the way it moved. But I'm still reluctant to put that label on it. Calling it Bigfoot makes it sound like I'm talking about a cartoon character or a mascot, not the very real, very physical creature I encountered. What I saw was flesh and blood. It had weight. It had presence. It moved with purpose and intelligence, and it had power, the kind of raw physical power that humans can only dream of. The image of it clearing that drainage ditch is burned into my memory, the perfect arc of its jump, the way it barely seemed to exert itself, the total silence of its landing. Sometimes I wonder if it saw me before I saw it. If it was watching me drive with my lights off, tracking my vehicle, maybe even following me. I wonder how many times I might have driven right past it on previous patrols, oblivious in the darkness. The thought still makes my skin crawl. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. Hell, if someone told me this story, I'd probably be skeptical too. But I know what I saw. I was stone cold sober, wide awake, and in full possession of my faculties. That thing was real. And the scariest part is that it's probably still out there, moving through the forests at night, watching, waiting. Sometimes when I'm driving on dark roads now, especially near wooded areas, I get this prickly feeling on the back of my neck. I'll catch myself scanning the tree line, half expecting to see that massive silhouette again, illuminated in my headlights for just a split second before it vanishes into the darkness. And every time I feel that way, I remember what my flight chief told me that night. Some things you just don't put in the official record. Some experiences you keep to yourself. But the memory never fades. The certainty never wavers. I know what I saw. And sometimes I think it saw me too. Story 3. It was September 1st, 2004. I remember the date exactly because my wife had just gone back to teaching the day before, and we joked about how quiet the house would be with both kids back in school. I'd gone to bed around 11 that night after watching some forgettable sitcom rerun. The phone rang at 2:30 in the morning. Anyone who's ever been woken up by a phone call in the middle of the night knows that stomach-dropping feeling. Nothing good comes from middle-of-the-night calls. I fumbled for the phone in the dark, trying not to wake my wife. "Hello?" I mumbled, still half asleep. "Rob, it's Sam." My brother's voice sounded strange, tight and breathless. "Sam, what's wrong? Is everything okay?" I was fully awake now, sitting up in bed. I don't know. I need you to listen to me. Something's outside my house. My brother Samuel lived, I should say, since he moved closer to town after this. About 40 miles outside of Haines, Alaska. Real backwoods stuff. His nearest neighbor was over a mile away. We'd both grown up in Alaska, hunted since we were kids, knew every animal in those woods. "What do you mean, something? Like a bear?" Bears weren't uncommon, especially in September when they're fattening up for winter. "No, not a bear, not a moose, not anything I've ever seen before." There was something in his voice I'd never heard before. Sam's not the type to get spooked easily. He'd been a volunteer firefighter for 15 years, served in the army before that. I'd seen him face down a charging moose without flinching. "I'm outside right now," he whispered, "on the porch. I've got my rifle." "What happened?" I asked, now standing beside my bed, pulling on pants one-handed while keeping the phone pressed to my ear. "I was hooking up that trailer I borrowed from Dale. You know, the car hauler? I was going to tow that junker Camaro to the scrapyard tomorrow. So I'm out there in the yard, and I realized I couldn't see the hitch properly. Came back inside to grab a flashlight. That's when I heard it." "Heard what?" "Something moving in the trees. Not like an animal moving, not like anything I've heard before. It was deliberate. like someone trying to be quiet but not quite managing it. I felt that first real spike of fear then. The woods at night can play tricks on your mind, but Sam wasn't the imaginative type. So I grabbed the flashlight, the big mag light, and I sweep it across the tree line, and I catch this reflection, like eyes, you know, but not like normal animal eye shine, different somehow. My wife stirred beside me, mumbling something about what was wrong. I waved her off and moved into the hallway, so I focused the beam right at it, and Rob, his voice faltered. There's something there, standing just inside the tree line, or not standing exactly, it's kind of squatting like this. I could almost see him demonstrating even though we were on the phone, arms wrapped around its knees, but big, really big. A bear? I suggested again, knowing it wasn't. No, it's shaped like a man, but it's covered in this long black hair, shiny, like it's wet or something. And its eyes, Jesus, Rob, its eyes are huge, like a horse's eyes, but set in this face that's almost human, but not quite. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck. Sam wasn't a bullshitter, never had been. Are you sure it's not someone messing with you, like someone in a costume or something? Even as I said it, I knew how ridiculous it sounded. Who would be in a costume in the middle of the woods at 2:30 in the morning, 40 miles from town? When I put the light on it, it didn't run away, Sam continued, ignoring my question. It just turned its head a little, like the light bothered it, but it wasn't scared. It just sat there staring at me. I heard Sam take a shaky breath. I backed into the house and locked the door. That's when I called you. I don't know what to do, Rob. Did you call the police? I asked, already knowing the answer. The nearest trooper station was an hour away. And tell them what? There's a hairy man thing squatting in my woods. They'd think I was drunk. Are you? I had to ask. Stone sober. I had one beer with dinner. That's it. Around 6 o'clock. Then I heard something in the background. A sharp intake of breath from Sam. It's still there, he whispered. I can see it through the crack in the door. It hasn't moved. My heart was hammering now. Sam, close the door. Get away from the windows. Wait. Oh shit. Oh shit. Rob, it's moving. His voice had dropped to a barely audible whisper. What happened next is something I'll never forget. Over the phone, I heard this sound, a crashing through underbrush, heavy footsteps, branches breaking, and then this yell, not a scream, not a roar, but something in between, something that didn't sound human or animal. It was harsh, almost like something in pain, but angrier, louder than should be possible. I heard Sam swear, and what sounded like him stumbling back from the door. Sam? Sam? I was shouting now, not caring if I woke the whole house. There was heavy breathing on the line. It's running. Holy shit, Rob. It's running through the woods. I can hear it crashing away. Are you okay? Yeah, I'm inside. Door's locked. I've got my gun. He paused. Rob, what the hell was that? I don't know, I said honestly, but I'm coming over. No, he said quickly. Don't drive out here in the dark. Just stay on the phone with me for a bit. I sat down on the floor in my hallway, my back against the wall. My wife appeared in the doorway, concerned, but I waved her back to bed, mouthing, Sam, and it's okay. It wasn't okay, but I didn't want her worried. Tell me exactly what you saw again, I said to Sam, trying to keep my voice calm. It was big, maybe 6.5, 7 feet tall if it had been standing upright, but it was crouched down, kind of hugging its knees, completely covered in this black hair. Long hair, not fur like a bear, more like human hair, but all over, and its face. He trailed off. What about its face? It was wrong, like someone tried to make a human face but didn't get it quite right. The proportions were off. The eyes were too big, too far apart, like a horse's eyes, but in a face that was trying to be human. And when it looked at me, Rob, it knew I was looking at it. It understood. We stayed on the phone for almost 2 hours. Sam eventually did a careful check of all his windows and doors, his rifle ready. The thing, whatever it was, didn't come back. As the sky began to lighten around 4:30, he finally felt safe enough to try to get some sleep, with his gun next to his bed. I drove out to his place first thing in the morning. It took me almost an hour and a half to get there from Helens. When I arrived, Sam looked like hell, pale, with dark circles under his eyes. He clearly hadn't slept much. "Let's check the woods," he said after letting me in. We went out together, both carrying rifles. I didn't really think we'd find anything, part of me still wondering if stress or exhaustion had caused Sam to see things. But I couldn't explain that sound I'd heard over the phone. At the edge of the woods, where Sam said he'd seen the creature, we found something that made my blood run cold. The underbrush was crushed in a circular pattern about 4 feet across, like something heavy had been sitting there for a while. Leading away from that spot was a clear trail of broken branches and disturbed ground. Something big had run off in a hurry. We followed the trail for about 100 yards before it seemed to vanish. No footprints, nothing clear enough to identify what had made it. But something had definitely been there. "You believe me now?" Sam asked quietly. I nodded. "I never didn't believe you. I just hoped there might be an explanation." "There is an explanation," he said grimly, "but not one anyone would accept." We spent the rest of the day securing his house, checking windows, reinforcing the back door, setting up motion-activated floodlights. Sam moved into town 3 months later. He never said it was because of what happened, but I knew. We've talked about that night many times since then, comparing it to reports of similar sightings, trying to make sense of it. We're both lifelong Alaskans. We know what bears look like, even standing up. We know moose, wolves, every creature that should be in those woods. What we saw, what Sam saw, wasn't any of those. Sometimes when I'm hunting alone, I get this feeling like I'm being watched. I tell myself it's just nerves, just my brother's story getting to me. But deep down, I know the truth. There's something in those woods that shouldn't exist. Something watching, waiting, and I don't know what it wants. The weirdest part? Last year, a hiker found weird hair samples about 15 miles from Sam's old place. The lab said they couldn't identify them. Not bear, not human, not anything in their database. They just shrugged it off as contaminated samples. But I know better, and now, so do you. Story 4. I've never told this story to anyone other than my hunting buddies who were with me that weekend. I'm not sure why I'm finally sharing it now, almost 25 years later, but something about that day in Monte Cristo still haunts me. Maybe writing it down will help me make sense of what I saw. It was August of 1998. I was 32 then, had been bow hunting since I was 15, and knew the Monte Cristo area in Utah like the back of my hand. My dad started taking me there when I was just a kid. By 98, I'd spent at least part of every hunting season there for almost 2 decades. That particular weekend, I'd gone up with my buddies, Rick and Dave. We'd set up our main camp near the road, but I always liked to scout out a few miles deeper than most hunters go. I had my spots, places where I'd consistently found deer over the years. There was this one clearing about 3 miles in that had never failed me. Every season, without exception, I'd see at least 4 or 5 good-sized bucks there. The morning started normal enough. I left camp around 6, told the guys I'd be back by late afternoon. I took my black lab, Scout, with me. He wasn't a hunting dog by training, but he was good company and stayed quiet when it mattered. The weather was perfect, about 65 degrees, clear skies, slight breeze. I remember checking my watch when I got to my usual ridge overlooking the clearing. It was just past 9, prime time for deer movement in that area, but something was off. The clearing was empty, not just empty of deer, empty of everything. Normally you'd at least see some rabbits, maybe a fox, definitely birds, but there was nothing. Complete absence of wildlife. I waited about 45 minutes thinking maybe I'd just had bad timing. Sometimes you spook the game on your way in without realizing it, but nothing showed. Even Scout seemed different. Usually he'd be sniffing around, but that morning he just sat next to me, completely still, ears perked forward. That's when I first noticed the smell. At first, I thought maybe there was a dead animal nearby. It was this strong, rancid odor, like rotting meat mixed with something else I couldn't place, sort of musky and sour at the same time. I've field-dressed hundreds of animals, smelled plenty of decomposing carcasses in the woods, but this was different. It was more concentrated, and it seemed to be coming from the northeast of my position. I decided to investigate. The lack of game was weird enough that I wanted to see if I could figure out what was going on. Maybe there was a mountain lion in the area, or a bear had made a kill, something to explain why my reliable spot was suddenly dead empty. I followed the smell, with Scout now walking close to my legs rather than ranging ahead like he normally would. We hiked maybe half a mile through pretty dense forest before coming to a small clearing I'd never noticed before. It wasn't on any of my maps, and I was surprised I'd never stumbled across it in all my years hunting this area. The clearing was almost perfectly circular, maybe 100 feet across, and it looked like it had once been a pond that had dried up. The ground was sunken in the middle, with a gentle slope down from the edges. What really caught my eye was how green the grass was, much greener than anything else in the area, especially for August. The rest of the forest was starting to dry out with late summer, but this grass looked like April growth. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, just taking it in. The smell was definitely stronger here, almost overwhelmingly so. Scout refused to go any further. He sat down behind me and started making this low, whining sound. I'd never heard from him before. That's when I noticed it. What I initially thought was a burned tree stump near the middle of the dried pond. It was black, completely black, and stood out against all that green grass. But something about it didn't look right. It wasn't the jagged, irregular shape you'd expect from a stump. It was smoother, more rounded, pear-shaped almost. I raised my binoculars to get a better look. What I saw still doesn't make sense to me. The stump looked more like a large person wrapped in some kind of dark shawl or blanket, sitting with their back to me. It was maybe 4 feet tall in its sitting position, and every 30 seconds or so, it would shift slightly from side to side, like someone adjusting their posture when they've been sitting too long. My first thought was that it was another hunter, maybe in some kind of blind or camouflage, but who wears all black to hunt, and why would they be sitting in the middle of a dried-up pond with no cover? The longer I looked, the more unsettled I felt. There was something deeply wrong about the proportions. The head part seemed too small for the body, and there were no distinct shoulders that I could make out, just this smooth, curved upper section that tapered down. Then I noticed the grass in front of the figure moving, not swaying in the wind. There was barely any breeze that day, but disturbed, like something was manipulating it. I couldn't see what was happening because the figure's body blocked my view, but the grass would bend down and then spring back up in irregular patterns. I stood there watching for maybe 10 minutes, completely frozen. Part of me wanted to call out, to see if it was just some person in an odd get-up, but a deeper instinct kept me silent. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to know when something feels dangerous, and every alarm bell in my body was ringing. Scout was now trembling against my leg, still making that strange whining sound. That's what finally broke my trance. My dog was scared. Scout, who had faced down coyotes without blinking, who had once stood his ground when we surprised a black bear on a trail. Whatever this thing was, Scout wanted nothing to do with it. I backed away slowly, not taking my eyes off the figure until we were back among the trees. Then I turned and walked as quickly and quietly as I could back toward the ridge where I'd started. I didn't run. Running in the woods is a good way to trip and hurt yourself, but I moved with purpose, constantly checking over my shoulder. The whole way back, I kept trying to rationalize what I'd seen. Maybe it was a cow or a moose that had wandered in and gotten stuck somehow, but I've seen plenty of both, and this didn't move like either animal. Maybe it was a bear sitting up on its haunches, but the proportions were all wrong, and bears don't sit still that long. Plus, the color was too uniformly black. No brown patches, no variations in the fur that you'd see on a real animal. When I got back to my original spot on the ridge, I decided I was done scouting for the day. I needed to get back to camp, to be around people. The walk back was strange. I felt watched the entire time, though I never saw anything following us. When we got to camp around 2 in the afternoon, Rick and Dave were surprised to see me back so early. I made up some excuse about the heat, didn't tell them what I'd seen. I wasn't sure what to say. I couldn't explain it to myself, let alone to them. That night was worse. Scout wouldn't settle down. He kept pacing around the camp, then running to the edge of our clearing and staring into the dark woods, hackles raised. He'd never acted like this before. Around midnight, he started barking at something in the forest. 3 sharp barks, then silence as he stared intently into the darkness. I got up and shined my flashlight where he was looking, but couldn't see anything. Dave and Rick noticed it too. "What's got into your dog?" Rick asked. I just shrugged it off, said maybe he was picking up on a coyote or something, but I knew it was more than that. Scout wasn't just alert, he was afraid. And Scout was never afraid. None of us slept well that night. Around 3 in the morning, we all woke up to a strange sound, sort of a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from all directions at once. It lasted maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. "What the hell was that?" Dave whispered. None of us had an answer. By dawn, I'd made up my mind. "I think we should head out," I told the guys as we made coffee. "Scout's acting weird, and I've got a bad feeling." To my relief, they didn't argue. We packed up camp in record time and were on the road by 7. As we drove away, I finally told them what I'd seen. I expected them to laugh, to tell me I'd imagined it or mistaken some natural formation for something it wasn't. But they didn't. Instead, Dave said something that chilled me. My uncle used to work Forest Service up in Idaho. He said there are things in the deep woods that don't have names. It's been almost 25 years, and I've never gone back to Monte Cristo. I still hunt, but I stick to different areas now. I've looked at maps, tried to find that dried-up pond on Google Earth, but I've never been able to locate it. I don't know what I saw that day. It wasn't a cow, wasn't a moose, wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything I recognized from all my years in the woods. Sometimes I almost convinced myself it was just a weird stump and my imagination ran wild. But then I remember Scout, how he acted that day and that night, and I know it was something real, something that didn't belong there, or maybe something that belonged there more than I did. All I know for sure is that there are places in the wilderness where you get the feeling you're not the hunter anymore, and when you get that feeling, the smart thing to do is leave. Story 5. This happened back in the winter of 2009. My husband James and I were driving from just outside Fargo, Oklahoma, heading toward Fort Supply. It was one of those cold, miserable winter evenings. Not quite freezing, but that bone-chilling kind of cold, where the dampness seems to seep right through your clothes. A light drizzle had been falling steadily for hours, making the roads slick and visibility poor. It was around 7 in the evening, already pitch black out there. Anyone who knows that stretch of highway understands how isolated it feels, especially at night. You've got the Wolf Creek area running alongside, water on one side, dense trees on the other. Our headlights barely cut through the darkness, and the rhythmic squeak of the wipers was the only sound, besides our casual conversation about some home renovation plans. James was driving our old Ford Explorer. We were coming around one of those long, gradual curves when we saw headlights approaching from the opposite direction. Nothing unusual about that, though traffic was sparse out there at that hour. What happened next? I still get goosebumps thinking about it. As both our vehicles approached each other, our combined headlights illuminated something standing directly on the yellow center line of the highway. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like my mind was struggling to fit this thing into any category I understood. It was enormous, not just tall, though it had to be over 7 feet, but massive in presence. Every inch of it was covered in thick, dark hair or fur that hung heavy with moisture from the drizzle. The hair wasn't matted exactly, but it clung to the creature's body in a way that outlined its frame even more clearly. James slammed on the brakes. I remember the jolt as the seatbelt locked and the sound of our tires against the wet asphalt. The other car, I think it was some kind of sedan, did the same. We ended up stopped, facing opposite directions, with this being directly between our vehicles, fully illuminated by both sets of headlights. Time seemed to stretch in that moment. The creature didn't move. It just stood there perfectly still, like it was frozen in place. Its arms hung down at its sides, and that's another detail I can't forget. They were disproportionately long, reaching almost to its knees. They weren't thin either. Everything about this thing was solid, powerful. It wasn't some guy in a costume. You could see the muscle definition through the wet hair, the width of its shoulders, the thickness of its neck. Its back was partially toward us. Its face turned slightly away, looking toward the tree line. I couldn't see its face clearly, but I could make out its profile, a flattened nose, a heavy brow ridge, no visible ears that I could discern through the hair. For what felt like forever, but was probably 30 seconds, nobody moved. Not us, not the other driver, not the creature. The only sound was the idle of our engines and the patter of rain on the roof. I remember my breath fogging up the passenger window as I leaned closer, unable to look away. Then, without any warning, it moved. God, the way it moved still haunts me. There was no hesitation, no wind-up. 1 second it was standing there, and the next it was in motion, a fluid, powerful leap toward the creek side of the road. It cleared the entire shoulder in a single bound. That's not exaggeration. This thing jumped maybe 15 feet horizontally from a standstill and vanished over the embankment toward the water. I expected to hear a splash. The creek was high from recent rain, but there was nothing, just silence, like it had been swallowed by the darkness. I remember grabbing James's arm so hard my knuckles turned white. "Go," I kept saying. "Please go." My voice sounded strange even to me, high and tight with fear. The other car was already pulling away, accelerating quickly north. James put the Explorer in drive and we continued south, both of us silent for several miles. When we finally spoke, it was almost in whispers, like we were afraid it might hear us somehow. "Did you see that?" James asked, his hand still gripping the steering wheel too tightly. "What the hell was it?" I remember asking, even though deep down I already had a suspicion. Growing up in rural Oklahoma, you hear stories, legends about creatures in the woods. Most people dismiss them as campfire tales, but there's always those few accounts told by people you know aren't liars or drunks that make you wonder. What we saw that night wasn't a bear. Bears don't stand upright that way, with that posture. It wasn't a man. No human being is built like that. The proportions were all wrong, and the size, the sheer size of it, rules out any normal explanation. We made it home that night and sat in our kitchen until dawn, talking in circles, trying to rationalize what we'd seen. James suggested maybe it was some kind of wildlife that the rain and darkness had made appear larger or stranger than it was. I nodded along, but neither of us believed it. For weeks afterward, I had trouble sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that silhouette on the yellow line. I kept thinking about the other driver too. Someone else saw it. Someone else could confirm we weren't crazy, but we had no way of knowing who they were or how to find them. We told a few close friends and James's brother, but the reactions were predictable. Polite disbelief, jokes about Bigfoot tourism, suggestions that maybe we should call one of those TV shows that hunts for cryptids. We stopped bringing it up. A couple months later, I was at the grocery store in town when I overheard two men talking about something strange they'd seen near Wolf Creek. My heart nearly stopped. I lingered by the produce, pretending to inspect avocados while straining to hear their conversation. They were describing a series of unusual tracks found along the creek bank. big as dinner plates, one of them said, and how something had been disturbing their cattle at night. I wanted so badly to approach them, to tell them what we'd seen, but I couldn't make myself do it. What if they laughed? What if they didn't? What if talking about it somehow made it more real? That spring, James and I made a decision to avoid that stretch of highway. We'd take the longer route through town if we needed to head that direction. It added 20 minutes to the drive, but neither of us complained. Some unspoken agreement between us. It's been years now, and we've gradually returned to using that road when necessary, but never at night, never in the rain. The thing that stays with me most isn't just the creature itself, but how it made me feel. Standing there on that road, staring at something that shouldn't exist according to everything I'd been taught about the world, it fundamentally changed something in me. There was this profound sense of being small, of realizing the world is wider and stranger than we allow ourselves to believe. I've read about other encounters since then, descriptions that match what we saw with eerie similarity. The height, the proportions, the way it moved. People report that same frozen moment of mutual shock, that same impossible speed when they finally flee. I've wondered countless times about the other driver. Do they lie awake sometimes, remembering? Did they tell anyone, or did they bury the memory, deciding it was better not to know? There's a creek not far from our house. Sometimes when it rains heavily, I find myself standing at the window, staring out into the darkness at the tree line. James caught me once and just quietly put his arm around my shoulders. He didn't need to ask what I was looking for. I don't know what to call what we saw that night. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, some unknown species. All I know is that it was real, it was massive, and for 30 seconds on a rainy winter night, it stood on a yellow line in Oklahoma while two vehicles full of humans stared in disbelief. I still drive that route sometimes during daylight hours. Every time we round that curve, I feel my body tense up, my eyes automatically scanning the center line. James reaches over and squeezes my hand when we pass that spot. He doesn't need to say anything. We both know. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the woods at night, crossing roads when it thinks no one is watching. I wonder if it remembers us as clearly as we remember it. I wonder what it was thinking in those long seconds when we all stared at each other, caught in the headlights between two worlds. I don't have answers, just the memory of something impossible standing in the rain, and the certainty that the woods around us hold secrets we're not meant to understand. Story 6. I've debated posting this for years, not because I'm afraid people won't believe me. I stopped caring about that a long time ago, but because I still get chills thinking about it. I'm a retired police officer now, but what happened that summer of '82 still haunts me. I was 16 then, and nothing in my 30 years of law enforcement came close to what we experienced in those woods. It was the summer after Mount St. Helens had erupted. The area was still recovering, trees knocked flat like matchsticks, ash everywhere. My buddy Jake's family had this cabin about 20 miles from the blast zone, and our parents finally let us go up there. It was me, Jake, and our friends Mitch and Trevor. We'd been to that cabin dozens of times before, knew those woods like the backs of our hands. The moment we got out of Jake's dad's old Chevy Suburban, something felt off. Trevor felt it too. I could tell by the way he kept looking over his shoulder as we unloaded our gear. The forest seemed quieter than usual. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just this heavy silence that pressed in around us. You guys feel that? I remember asking. Jake laughed it off. It's just the mountain, man. Everything's different since the eruption. I wanted to believe him, but there was this nagging feeling that we were being watched, not by something human either. It was more primal, like when you're alone in the dark and suddenly know you're not actually alone. After getting settled, we decided to hike to this creek about 2 miles in. We'd been there countless times, but the landscape had changed so much since the eruption. Trees we used as landmarks were gone, replaced by new growth and scrub brush. The air still smelled faintly of ash and pine. We'd hiked maybe a mile when Trevor stopped suddenly. "Did you guys hear that?" he whispered. We all froze, listening. There was a cracking sound, like something heavy stepping on branches, coming from the ridge to our left. But when we looked, nothing was there. "Probably just a deer," Mitch said, but he didn't sound convinced. We continued hiking, but I noticed we all stayed closer together than usual. The sky darkened as clouds rolled in. A summer thunderstorm was brewing, and none of us wanted to be caught in it. "Let's head back," Jake suggested, as the first rumble of thunder echoed across the valley. No one argued. The wind picked up, bringing with it that electric feeling before a storm. We quickened our pace, following the narrow trail back toward the cabin. We were maybe 400 yards from the clearing where the cabin stood when I spotted it. A tall, black figure standing absolutely motionless at the edge of the forest. At first, I thought it was a burned tree stump. There were plenty of those around. But then I realized it was watching us. "Guys," I said, my voice barely audible over the wind, "look over there." One by one they stopped and followed my gaze. The figure stood at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It was broad-shouldered and covered in what looked like dark fur. The way it stood was unmistakably bipedal, but definitely not human. "What the fuck is that?" Mitch whispered. As if it heard him, the figure slowly turned and disappeared into the tree line. Not running, just deliberate, like it didn't care if we saw it or not. None of us spoke as we practically ran back to the cabin. Inside, with the door locked, we finally let out the breath we'd been collectively holding. "That wasn't a bear," Trevor said, stating what we all knew. "Bears don't stand like that." "Maybe it was someone messing with us," Jake suggested, but his voice trembled slightly. We spent that night huddled in the cabin, jumping at every sound the storm threw at us. None of us slept well. The next morning, in the clear light of day, we tried to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was a hunter in dark gear. Maybe it was a shadow playing tricks on us. 2 days passed. We stayed close to the cabin, fishing in the nearby pond and trying to convince ourselves that we'd imagined the whole thing. But on the 3rd day, curiosity got the better of us. We decided to check out the spot where we'd seen the figure. The ground was still damp from the storm, and as we approached the tree line, Mitch called out, "Holy shit, guys! Look at this!" In a patch of mud near a small clearing was a footprint. Not just any footprint. This thing was huge, at least 16 inches long. It was clearly defined in the mud, with 5 toes and an arch like a human foot, but much, much larger. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was incredibly heavy. "That's not a bear," Jake whispered, stating the obvious. We spent about 20 minutes examining the print, taking photos with Jake's Polaroid camera. There were a few other partial prints, but this one was perfect, like it had been deliberately left for us to find. As we headed back across the field toward the cabin, Trevor suddenly grabbed my arm so hard it hurt. "Don't move," he hissed. About 50 yards away, sitting on a moss-covered stump, was the creature. In broad daylight, there was no mistaking what we were seeing. It was massive, with broad shoulders and long arms. Its body was covered in dark brown, almost black fur. But it was the face that got me, so eerily human-like, yet not human at all. Its brow was heavy, its nose flat and wide. But the eyes were what haunted me later. They were deep-set and intelligent, watching us with what I can only describe as curiosity. For what felt like an eternity, we stood frozen, staring at each other across that field. Then it did something odd. Instead of turning just its head to look around, it rotated its entire upper body, like its neck and head were fused together. The movement was so unnatural it sent shivers down my spine. Then Mitch panicked. He took off running toward the cabin, and the rest of us followed without a second thought. I glanced back once and saw the creature stand up. It was even taller than I'd thought, easily 7.5 feet. We burst into the cabin, gasping for breath. Jake's dad was there, cleaning his fishing gear. He took one look at our faces and knew something was wrong. "What happened?" he demanded. Between gulps of air, we told him what we'd seen. To his credit, he didn't laugh or dismiss us. Instead, he went to his room and came back with a revolver. "Where's your dad's rifle?" he asked me. My dad had left his .30-06 at the cabin for hunting season. I retrieved it from the gun cabinet, my hands shaking so badly I could barely load it. "Stay here," Jake's dad told the others. Then to me, "You know how to use that thing. Come with me." We went out, circling the cabin and scanning the tree line. The creature was gone, but Jake's dad took us to where we'd seen it sitting. The stump was there, and around it, the grass was flattened in a way that confirmed something large had been there. As we headed back to the cabin, my mum came running out, her face pale. "It's behind you!" she shouted, pointing. Jake's dad and I spun around, rifles raised. About 100 yards back, at the edge of the trees, I caught a glimpse of the creature. Just for a second before it melted into the forest, but it was enough to confirm we weren't crazy. That evening, Jake's dad radioed a game warden he knew. The guy showed up the next morning, clearly skeptical, but professional enough not to say so outright. We took him to the footprint, which had been partially washed away by overnight rain, but was still visible. His face changed when he saw it. "That's unusual," was all he said. We showed him where we'd seen the creature sitting. He poked around the area, then suddenly called us over. In the brush beyond the stump was a large depression, like something heavy had been lying there, and the smell, God, the smell, like body odor mixed with something fecal, so strong it made my eyes water. The warden took samples and measurements, promising to file a report, but as he was leaving, he pulled me aside. "Listen," he said quietly, "I've been working these woods for 15 years. There are things out here that don't make it into the official reports, things we don't talk about. You kids be careful, all right?" We left the next day. None of us wanted to stay any longer, not even Jake's dad, though he tried to play it cool for our sake. Over the years, I've thought a lot about what we saw. As a police officer, I was trained to observe, to look for logical explanations. But there was nothing logical about that creature. It wasn't aggressive. It could have easily attacked us if it wanted to. It seemed more watchful, like we were the intruders in its territory. I've heard theories that the Mount St. Helens eruption displaced a lot of wildlife, forcing them into new areas. Maybe it did the same for whatever this was. Maybe we interrupted its attempt to establish a new territory after losing its home to the volcano. I'm 60 now, and I've never told this story outside of our small group. Mitch refuses to talk about it at all. Trevor moved away years ago. Jake and I still get together sometimes, and occasionally, after a few beers, we'll bring it up. The memories haven't faded, the way it moved, those eyes studying us, that overwhelming feeling of being in the presence of something ancient and powerful. I don't expect anyone to believe me, but I know what I saw that summer, and sometimes when I'm alone in the woods, I still get that feeling of being watched, and I wonder if somewhere out there, it remembers me too. Story 7. I've been hunting most of my life, over 35 years of experience in the backwoods and mountains of Utah. I've encountered just about everything out there, bears, moose, mountain lions, you name it. But what happened to me back in October of '87 still gives me chills whenever I think about it. I've never told many people about this, but I need to get it off my chest. Maybe someone else has experienced something similar. It was the second weekend of deer season. I'd taken Friday off work to get an early start, heading up to my usual hunting grounds in the Wasatch Mountains in Weber County. The weather that morning was perfect, crisp autumn air, maybe 40 degrees, with patches of fog hanging in the valleys. The aspen leaves were golden yellow and red, and there was this peaceful quiet that you only get in the mountains during fall. I'd been out since before dawn, moving slowly through familiar territory. By around 10 in the morning, I'd made my way into a part of the range I knew pretty well. A series of small canyons with good deer trails running through them. I'd bagged a nice 4-pointer in that same area the previous year. I was alone that day. My usual hunting buddy Mike had caught the flu, and my brother couldn't get the time off work. In hindsight, I wish someone had been with me to witness what happened. Maybe then I wouldn't question my own sanity. Around 11:30, I stopped to rest on a fallen log, had some jerky and water, and decided to push a little further up into one of the smaller canyons where I'd spotted deer sign earlier. The sun was high now, warming things up, and I remember taking off my orange vest for a minute to cool down. That's when I first heard it. At first, I thought maybe it was distant thunder, but the sky was clear blue. Then I wondered if it was machinery, maybe a logging operation on the other side of the ridge. But this area was pretty remote. The sound was like nothing I'd ever heard before. A deep, rumbling growl that seemed to vibrate through the ground and into my chest. It was low-pitched, but loud. Impossibly loud, like someone had taken the deepest bass speaker you can imagine and cranked it to maximum volume. The hair on my arms stood up immediately. Whatever was making that sound had to be massive. My first coherent thought was bear, but I'd encountered black bears before, and they don't make sounds anywhere near that deep or powerful. My curiosity got the better of my initial fear. I checked my rifle, a Remington 30-06 I'd had for years, making sure it was loaded and ready. Then I started moving cautiously toward the sound, following a deer trail that wound through the bottom of the small canyon. The vocalization came again. This time, it was a series of grunts, followed by a sustained growl that seemed to echo off the canyon walls. I felt it more than heard it, this weird pressure in my ears and chest. I remember thinking it sounded angry or territorial, not like a predator hunting, but like something warning me away. I kept moving forward, stepping as quietly as I could. The trail curved around a bend, and I could see that the sound was coming from a dense thicket of scrub oak and pine trees growing on a steep slope about 100 feet up from the canyon floor. The undergrowth was thick there, probably 8 to 10 feet tall, making it impossible to see what was inside. I stopped and listened. The growling had paused, but I had this overwhelming sense of being watched. The woods had gone completely silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just that heavy, waiting silence that sometimes comes before a storm. I've spent enough time in the wilderness to know when something isn't right. Every instinct was telling me to turn around, but I kept thinking it must be a moose or maybe an elk, though the sound was all wrong for either. I decided to make some noise to scare whatever it was away. Hey there," I called out, stomping my foot and waving my arms like you're supposed to do with bears. That was a mistake. The response was immediate, a furious, thunderous roar that made my knees weak. It wasn't just loud, it was powerful enough that I could feel it in my chest cavity. No animal I know makes a sound like that. Not bears, not mountain lions, nothing. I stood frozen as the vocalization continued, changing pitch and tone. It wasn't just random noise, it had pattern and intention to it, almost like speech, but nothing resembling human language. More like, I don't know how to describe it, like if a bear could talk, but with intelligence behind it. Despite every alarm bell going off in my head, I moved closer, positioning myself at the base of the slope, directly beneath the thicket. I think I was still trying to convince myself it was something I could explain. A bear, an elk, anything normal. That's when things got truly terrifying. As I stood there, the brush began to shake violently about 9 or 10 feet off the ground. Not like something small moving through it, but like something big was deliberately pushing branches aside. The growling changed, becoming more agitated, with sharp, barking sounds mixed in. I raised my rifle, not aiming but ready. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear my pulse in my ears. My mouth went completely dry. "What the hell are you?" I remember whispering. The response came in the form of a rock, not a pebble, but a basketball-sized boulder that suddenly rolled out from the thicket and down the slope straight toward me. I had to jump aside to avoid being hit. It wasn't just falling because of gravity. It had been deliberately pushed or thrown. Before I could process that, a second rock, even larger than the first, came crashing down the slope, missing me by just a few feet. It hit a tree at the bottom with enough force to leave a dent in the trunk. That was it. Message received. Whatever was up there wanted me gone, and I wasn't about to argue. I didn't run. Running triggers predator instincts, but I backed away steadily, keeping my eyes on the thicket, my rifle ready. As I retreated, the growling continued, following me, like whatever made the sound was moving parallel to me, but staying hidden in the thick brush along the ridge. I kept backing up until I reached the bend in the trail, then turned and walked quickly back the way I'd come. The sounds followed me for about a quarter mile before gradually fading. Even when I couldn't hear it anymore, I felt like I was being watched. That prickling sensation on the back of your neck that tells you something's there, just out of sight. I didn't stop until I reached my truck, parked about 2 miles away. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole time, half expecting to see something massive emerge from the trees, but I never saw what made those sounds or threw those rocks. The drive home was a blur. I kept replaying everything in my mind, trying to make sense of it. I've spent my entire adult life in those mountains. I know every animal that lives there, what they sound like, how they behave. This was something else entirely. When I got home, my wife took one look at my face and asked what happened. I couldn't tell her. How do you explain something you don't understand yourself? I mumbled something about a close call with a bear, took a long shower, and tried to forget about it. But I couldn't forget. That night I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that deep rumbling growl. I felt those vibrations in my chest. The next day, I called Mike, despite him being sick, and told him what happened. He suggested it might have been a bear with some kind of vocal deformity, or maybe even a prank, someone with a speaker system trying to scare hunters. But that doesn't explain the rocks, or the intelligence I sensed behind those sounds. I haven't been back to that specific canyon since. I still hunt, still fish, still spend time in the mountains. But something changed in me that day. There's a wariness now, a constant awareness that there might be things in those woods that we don't understand. I've done research since then, read accounts from other hunters, hikers, people who've spent time in remote areas. Some of their stories sound eerily similar to mine. They describe the same sounds, the same sense of being watched, the same throwing of rocks. Most people call it Bigfoot or Sasquatch. I don't know what to call it. I never saw it clearly enough to say what it was. All I know is that in all my years hunting those mountains, I've never encountered anything else that made sounds like that, or displayed that kind of deliberate, intelligent behavior to warn me away. It's been over 30 years now, and I still get goosebumps talking about it. Sometimes when I'm in the woods, especially as dusk approaches, I catch myself listening for that distinctive growl. Part of me hopes I never hear it again, but another part of me wishes I'd had the courage to stay, to get a glimpse of whatever was hidden in that thicket. Whatever it was, it let me go. It could have come after me, but it didn't. It just wanted me out of its territory, and I respected that wish. Some places in the wilderness aren't meant for us. Some things out there deserve to remain undisturbed. I still can't explain what happened that day. Maybe I never will. But I know what I heard, what I felt, and what I experienced. It was real, and it changed how I see the wilderness forever. Story 8. I've kept this to myself for over 35 years now. I was only 6 years old when it happened, but the memory is burned into my brain like it was yesterday. I can still feel the summer heat, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and that horrible feeling of being watched by something that shouldn't exist. It was the summer of '87 in Brookville, Pennsylvania. Our neighborhood was the kind where all the kids would be outside until the streetlights came on. That particular evening, there were about 8 of us playing hide and seek. I remember I was wearing my favorite pink shorts and a t-shirt with a rainbow on it. My mom had pulled my hair into pigtails that morning, but by evening, they were messy and falling out. The sun was getting low, but it wasn't dark yet. That kind of golden summer evening light where shadows start to stretch, but you can still see everything clearly. It was my turn to hide, and I was determined to find the best spot so I wouldn't be it next round. Another girl from down the street, Jenny was her name, decided we should hide together. She was the same age as me, and we weren't really close friends, but you know how it is when you're a kid. Whoever's available becomes your partner in crime. We ran behind Mr. Peterson's house, where there was this unpaved alley between two rows of garages. It wasn't much of an alley, really. Just a dirt path with weeds growing through it that connected our street to the one behind us. The garages created these tall walls on either side, making it feel like a tunnel. I remember thinking it was perfect because the seeker would have to come all the way down the alley to spot us. We were giggling and shushing each other as we ducked behind one of the garages. The concrete was cool against my back, and I remember peering around the corner to see if anyone was coming yet. That's when I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. There was someone, at the far end of the alley, maybe 50 feet away, walking directly toward us. It was huge, taller than my dad, taller than Mr. Peterson, who we thought was a giant because he was 6'4". This thing was massive, and it was covered in thick, dark hair. Not like a beard or something, but all over its body. I froze. My whole body just locked up. Jenny hadn't seen it yet, and she was still giggling behind me, asking what I was looking at. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. The thing was walking upright like a person, but there was something so wrong about how it moved. Its arms were incredibly long, hanging down at its sides, almost to its knees, and its head, its head sat directly on its shoulders. There was no neck, just this massive head that seemed to melt into its body. The sun was behind it, so I couldn't make out all the details of its face at first. Just this dark silhouette slowly moving toward us. Jenny finally peeked around me and saw it too. I felt her hand grab my arm so tight it hurt, but I couldn't even react to the pain. We were both just standing there, completely paralyzed. The thing kept walking toward us, steady and deliberate. It wasn't rushing, wasn't trying to hide. It was just coming. And then it did something I'll never forget as long as I live. It screamed. It wasn't like any sound I'd ever heard before or since. Not like an animal, not like a person. It started low and then got higher, this long, drawn-out wail that echoed off the garage walls around us. I could feel it in my chest, like the sound was physically pushing against me. My ears hurt from how loud it was. When it screamed, I could see its mouth. It had this wide, box-shaped jaw that opened unnaturally far, showing these large, square teeth. Not pointed like animal teeth, square, almost human-like, but bigger and more uniform. And its eyes, I'll never forget those eyes. They were dark and deep-set, watching us while it screamed like it was studying our reaction. The worst part? It never stopped walking. It didn't speed up, didn't slow down, just kept coming toward us at the same steady pace while making that horrible sound, like it knew we couldn't move, knew we were trapped by our own fear. Something finally snapped in me and Jenny at the same moment. We both turned and ran. I've never run so fast in my life. My legs were burning. My lungs felt like they were going to explode. But all I could think was that I had to get away from that thing. We burst out of the alley and ran through the Wilsons' backyard, jumping over their garden hose and nearly knocking over a bird bath. I remember Mrs. Wilson yelling at us for trampling her flowers, but we didn't stop. We ran all the way back to my house, which was where all the kids were supposed to meet when the game was over. We were sobbing, trying to explain what we'd seen to the other kids who had gathered on my front porch. Most of them laughed and said we were making it up to scare them. One of the older boys, Tommy, said we probably just saw Mr. Peterson taking out his trash and got scared because of the shadows. When my mom came out to see what all the commotion was about, Jenny and I tried to tell her too. I remember the way her face changed, from concerned to relieved to slightly annoyed, as she decided we were just letting our imaginations run wild. She called Jenny's mom to come pick her up, and that was it. No one believed us. Jenny refused to talk about it after that night. At school that fall, she would walk away whenever I brought it up. Eventually, I stopped trying. But I knew what I saw wasn't Mr. Peterson or shadows or my imagination. I had nightmares for months afterward. I couldn't go near that alley again. My parents thought I was being dramatic, but they didn't understand. How could they? They hadn't seen those eyes watching them, while that unholy scream filled the air. About a week after it happened, I overheard something that made my blood run cold. Mrs. Kowalski, who lived at the far end of our street, the house closest to where the alley came out, was talking to my mom over the fence. She mentioned hearing the strangest scream that same evening, said it made the hair on her arm stand up, and that her dog refused to go outside for the rest of the night. My mom just nodded politely and changed the subject, but I wanted to scream, "That's what we saw! That's what we heard! Someone else heard it too!" I never told anyone else after that summer. What was the point? Adults had already decided we were just scared kids making up stories. But as I got older, I started reading about strange sightings in the woods, about creatures that walked like men but weren't men. I saw drawings and descriptions that matched what Jenny and I had seen. The thick dark hair, the wide mouth with square teeth, the loud distinctive scream, the impossible height. They called it Bigfoot, Sasquatch, a legend, a myth. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear standing on its hind legs. It wasn't a man in a costume. The way it moved was too fluid, too natural. The scream was too primal, too otherworldly, and those eyes, they held an intelligence that still haunts me. They were watching us, evaluating us. I'm 45 now, and I've never gone camping. I don't hike. I don't even like being in wooded areas during daylight. My husband thinks I'm just not outdoorsy, and I've let him believe that. How do you tell someone that you're terrified of running into a creature that most people think doesn't exist? Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Jenny and I hadn't run. Would it have just walked past us? Would it have stopped? Would it have taken us? I'll never know. But in my darkest moments, I'm convinced that it was coming for us specifically, that it knew we were there before we ever saw it, that the scream wasn't a warning or a call. It was a message meant just for us. The strangest part? When I close my eyes at night, sometimes I can still hear that scream echoing in my head. And occasionally, when I'm drifting off to sleep, I get this overwhelming feeling that it's still out there, still walking that same steady pace, still coming. I've tried to find Jenny over the years, through social media and mutual friends, but it's like she disappeared. Part of me wonders if she had other encounters after that day. If maybe whatever we saw that summer evening in '87 eventually found her. I never went back to that alley. My family moved away from Brookville when I was 12, and I've never returned. But sometimes I look at Google Maps and find our old neighborhood. The houses are still there, the garages are still there, and that unpaved alley is still there, running between them like a scar. I'm writing this now because I recently heard about similar sightings in that area. A local news story about strange noises and large footprints found in the woods just outside town. They interviewed some local teenagers who described hearing a scream that didn't sound human or animal. The reporter laughed it off as summer hijinks, but I knew instantly, it's still there, it's always been there, and sometimes when the phone rings late at night and there's no one on the other end, just the sound of breathing, I wonder if somehow, impossibly, it remembers me too. Story 9. I've debated posting this for months now. I'm not the type to make up stories or chase after cryptids, but what my girlfriend and I saw last June has completely changed my perspective on what might be living in our forests. I need to get this off my chest. I'm an avid hiker and have been exploring the trails around East Texas for years without incident. My girlfriend Amber had recently moved to the area, and I was excited to show her some of my favorite spots. We decided on a day hike through a more secluded section of the Davy Crockett National Forest near Kennard. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and we figured the trails would be empty. We arrived around 4:30, planning to hike for a couple hours before heading back before sunset. The weather was perfect, not too hot for June in Texas, with a light breeze keeping the mosquitoes at bay. We packed light, just water, trail mix, and our phones. The first hour was completely normal. The trail wound through beautiful pine forest with that rich, earthy smell of decomposing pine needles that I've always loved. Amber was taking photos of wildflowers, and we were just enjoying being away from the city. No other hikers around, just birds and the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Around 6 o'clock, we reached a section where the trail narrowed and the pines grew taller and thicker. The canopy overhead blocked most of the sunlight, creating this weird twilight effect, even though sunset was still a couple hours away. I remember checking my watch and thinking we should probably start heading back soon. That's when we heard it. It came from somewhere ahead of us and to the left. This sound I still can't properly describe. At first I thought it was a person screaming, but it was muffled and mixed with this deep growling that made the hair on my arms stand up. It wasn't a coyote or a bobcat. I've heard those plenty of times. It wasn't a bear. There aren't supposed to be any in this part of Texas anyway. The sound lasted maybe 3 seconds, then stopped. Amber grabbed my arm hard enough to leave marks. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I called out, thinking maybe it was another hiker in trouble. "Hello? Anyone there?" My voice sounded weirdly flat among the trees. Nothing. Just silence. And I mean complete silence. No birds, no insects, nothing. That's when I started feeling really uneasy. "Maybe we should head back," Amber suggested, but I felt weirdly compelled to investigate. I've been in these woods hundreds of times and never heard anything like that. Part of me thought maybe someone was hurt and needed help. "Let's just walk a little further," I said. "If we hear it again and it sounds like someone's in trouble, we can call the rangers." So we continued walking, but slower now, both of us straining to hear. The silence was oppressive. I kept stopping to listen, and Amber stayed close behind me. Not even 5 minutes later, we heard something crashing through the underbrush to our left. Not small movements, big, heavy thuds and snapping branches. Whatever it was big, and it was moving fast. I froze, and Amber clutched the back of my shirt. We both stared in the direction of the noise, but the trees were too thick to see anything. The crashing got louder, closer. Then it happened. Something, I still struggle to call it anything specific, burst out of the tree line and crossed the trail about 10 feet in front of us. 10 feet, close enough that I could have hit it with a rock if I'd thrown one. It was only visible for maybe 2 seconds, but those 2 seconds are burned into my memory. This thing was massive, at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller. It was covered in dark brown hair, not uniform in length but shaggy in some places, particularly around the shoulders. The build was like a human, but much wider, much heavier. It wasn't standing upright but bent forward, with these incredibly long arms swinging as it ran. Its legs were thick, thicker than my torso, but it moved with this disturbing agility, navigating the undergrowth like it had done it 1,000,000 times. The head is what really got me. It sat directly on the shoulders, no neck that I could see, just this hulking mass atop an already imposing frame. I couldn't see its face. It never looked at us. It just crossed from left to right and headed downhill into denser forest, and then it was gone. The sound of its movement faded almost immediately, like it knew exactly how to move through the woods without making noise despite its size. Amber and I stood there, completely frozen. I think I was holding my breath. Neither of us said anything for what felt like forever. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. Did you see that?" Amber finally whispered, her voice shaking. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. We both just stared down the slope where it had disappeared. The forest was thick. We couldn't see more than 20 or 30 feet through the trees. "What was it?" she asked, still whispering like she was afraid it would hear us. "I don't know," I said, but that was a lie. I knew exactly what we'd seen. I just couldn't bring myself to say it out loud because it sounded ridiculous. There was no way it was a bear. It moved on two legs, with a gait that was unsettlingly human-like. It wasn't a person in a costume. No costume could capture that natural movement or that mass. The way it navigated through the underbrush was too fluid, too confident. We stood there for maybe 5 minutes, just listening. Part of me wanted to follow it, to try to get another look or even a photo. But the rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get the hell out of there. The sun was getting lower and the forest was already dark under the pine canopy. No way was I risking being in these woods after dark. "We need to go," I said finally. "It's getting late." Amber didn't argue. We turned around and started walking back toward the trailhead, much faster than we'd come in. Neither of us wanted to run. Something instinctual told me running would be bad. But we moved as quickly as we could while still staying alert. I kept looking back over my shoulder. Every snapping twig or rustling leaf made us both jump. The forest that had seemed so peaceful just an hour earlier now felt menacing, like we were being watched from all sides. The walk back to the car was the longest 45 minutes of my life. We didn't talk much. I think we were both trying to process what we'd seen, while also staying hyper-aware of our surroundings. When we finally reached the parking lot, there were no other cars. We practically dove into mine and locked the doors immediately. It was only then that I realized how badly my hands were shaking. I could barely get the key in the ignition. Once we were driving away, Amber finally broke down. That was a Bigfoot, wasn't it?" she said, her voice cracking. "I mean, what else could it have been?" I didn't answer right away. I've always been a skeptical person. I never believed in cryptids or monsters or any of that stuff. But what we saw was real. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It wasn't anything I could rationalize away. "I think so," I finally admitted. "I can't think of anything else it could have been." We debated reporting it, but to who? The park rangers? Local police? We'd sound crazy. We had no proof, no photos, no video, not even footprints we could show someone. Just our word that we'd seen something impossible. We drove back to my apartment in almost complete silence. That night, neither of us slept well. Every noise outside made me tense up. I kept replaying those few seconds in my head, trying to convince myself it had been something else, something explainable. The next day, we talked about it more. We looked up Bigfoot sightings in East Texas. Turns out there have been quite a few reports from the Davy Crockett National Forest over the years. Some sounded eerily similar to what we experienced. It's been 4 months now, and I still haven't told many people. My brother thinks I'm making it up. My best friend suggested we might have seen a bear standing on its hind legs, but I know that's not what it was. Amber and I are still together, and we still go hiking, but never again in that part of the forest. Sometimes at night, I still hear that sound in my head, that muffled scream growl that doesn't sound like any animal I know. I wonder what it was doing there, if it was hunting or just passing through. I wonder if it knew we were there before we saw it. I don't have any grand conclusions or explanations. I don't know what to do with this experience. All I know is that something is living in those woods that shouldn't exist according to science, something huge and powerful that moves through the forest like it owns it. I keep thinking about going back with a camera, trying to get proof. But then I remember how I felt in that moment, that instinctive primal fear, that feeling that I was looking at something that didn't want to be seen, something that could have easily overpowered us if it had wanted to. So I stay away, but I think about it every day. That moment changed how I see the world. There are things out there we don't understand, things that have managed to stay hidden despite all our technology and exploration. If you've read this far, thanks for hearing me out. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw, and it wasn't human. Story 10. This happened almost 41 years ago now, but I remember it like it was yesterday. You don't forget something like that. You can't. I was 17 years old. It was late August of 1982, just before my senior year of high school was about to start. Me, Dave, and Chris were out driving around in Dave's beat-up Oldsmobile Cutlass. It was a piece of junk, but it had wheels, and that's all that mattered to us back then. We lived in Keene, New Hampshire. Nothing special, just a small New England town surrounded by woods and hills. In the summer, there wasn't much to do except cruise around, maybe find a place to drink some beers away from parents and cops. That night, we'd been driving the back roads for a couple hours, just wasting time, listening to music and talking about nothing important. School starting soon, girls we liked, the usual teenage stuff. It was getting dark, probably around 8:30 or 9, and we were on some county road I'd been on 100 times before. Dave suddenly turned onto this narrow dirt road I'd never noticed. When I asked where he was going, he just shrugged and said he wanted to see where it went. That was typical Dave, always curious, always pushing boundaries a little. The road was rough, full of potholes, and the Cutlass's suspension wasn't great. We were bouncing around in our seats, laughing about it. The headlights cut through the darkness as we went deeper into the woods. The trees got thicker on both sides, branches sometimes scraping against the windows. It felt like we were driving into a tunnel of trees. I remember thinking we should probably turn around, but nobody said anything. You know how it is when you're young. You don't want to be the first one to chicken out. After maybe 10 minutes on this dirt road, we came to this old wooden bridge crossing a creek. It wasn't much of a bridge, just some planks laid across, but it seemed solid enough. Dave stopped the car right before it, and we all just sat there for a minute, engine idling. "You think it's safe to cross?" Chris asked from the back seat. Dave tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. "Probably, but I gotta take a leak first." That was all it took. Suddenly, we all needed to pee. Funny how that works. So we got out of the car, leaving the headlights on and the engine running. It was quiet out there. The kind of quiet you only get deep in the woods at night. No traffic sounds, no people, just crickets and the occasional distant owl. The air was warm but not hot, typical late summer in New Hampshire. I remember the smell, pine, dirt, and that musty scent of decaying leaves. The headlights illuminated the bridge and maybe 20 feet of road beyond it, but everything else was pitch black. I walked a few steps to the side of the road to do my business. Dave went to the front of the car, and Chris wandered off toward this massive oak tree that stood about 30 feet from the bridge. I was just finishing up when I heard it, this weird grunting sound. At first, I thought it was Chris messing around, making stupid noises like he sometimes did. But then Dave called out, "What the hell is that?" And I knew it wasn't Chris. The sound came again, louder this time. It was coming from the big oak tree, the one near where Chris had walked. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever heard before. Not a bear, not a moose, nothing I could recognize. It was deep and guttural, almost like someone trying to clear their throat, but much louder and more aggressive. "Chris!" I called out, zipping up quickly. "You okay?" I heard him reply, his voice tight with fear. "Guys, there's something in the tree." We all froze, and that's when the branches started shaking. Not just a little movement from a squirrel or raccoon, the whole damn tree was trembling. Big branches, thick as my arm, were swaying and creaking. Whatever was up there was huge. The grunting changed to a growl, deep and rumbling, like nothing I'd ever heard. It made the hair on my arms stand up. We all backed toward the car, our eyes fixed on that oak tree. Chris was closest to the car, already reaching for the door handle. "Get in the car," Dave whispered, but none of us moved. We were paralyzed, watching those branches shake more and more violently. Then it happened. Something massive, dropped from the tree. It hit the ground with a thud I could feel through my shoes. The impact was so heavy, it seemed to make the earth shudder. For a second, there was complete silence. Even the crickets stopped chirping. In the dim light spilling from the headlights, I saw it rise up from a crouched position. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing at first. It was tall, so tall it seemed impossible. As it straightened to its full height, I realized it had to be at least 9 feet, maybe more. Its body was covered in thick grey-black hair, not like fur exactly, more like human hair, but coarser, hanging in patches across its massive frame. "Holy shit," I heard Dave whisper beside me. The creature's head was what struck me the most. It had this weird teardrop shape, wide near the shoulders but oddly flat on top, not round like a human head. In the faint light, I couldn't make out its face clearly, just a darker area where features should be. For a moment it just stood there, perfectly still, like it was assessing us. Then it moved, and God, the way it moved, it was both familiar and completely alien. It dropped to all fours for a second, then rose up again and began running along the roadside ditch parallel to where we were standing. Its stride was powerful, covering ground faster than any person could, arms swinging at its sides. As it passed in front of the headlights, I got a clear view for maybe 2 or 3 seconds. Its body was massive, muscular but lean, built for power and speed. The hair on its body moved with each stride, revealing glimpses of dark skin underneath. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt like it was watching us the whole time, even as it ran. It never slowed down, never hesitated. When it reached the bridge, it leaped, just one powerful bound that carried it completely across the creek. It landed on the other side with another ground-shaking thud, then disappeared into the darkness of the woods beyond. The whole thing probably lasted less than 20 seconds, but it felt like time had stretched out. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I was trembling all over, partly from fear, partly from adrenaline. "Get in the car!" Dave finally shouted, snapping us out of our trance. We scrambled inside, bumping into each other in our panic. Dave threw the car into reverse before Chris had even closed his door properly. The tires spun in the dirt as he backed up too fast, nearly hitting a tree. He shifted gears, turned the car around in a jerky 3-point turn, and then we were flying back down that dirt road, bouncing over potholes so hard I hit my head on the roof. Nobody spoke for a few minutes. The only sound was our heavy breathing and the engine straining as Dave pushed it to its limits on that rough road. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept looking back through the rear window, half expecting to see that thing chasing after us. When we finally reached the paved road, Dave pulled over and killed the engine. We all just sat there trying to catch our breath. "What the fuck was that?" Chris finally said, his voice cracking. Dave shook his head. "I don't know, man, I don't know." "It was a bear," I said, knowing even as I said it that it wasn't true. It had to be a bear. "Bears don't stand 9 feet tall," Dave replied quietly, "and they don't have heads shaped like that." "Bigfoot," Chris whispered. "We just saw a fucking Bigfoot." Part of me wanted to laugh at him, to dismiss it as ridiculous, but I couldn't. What else could it have been? Nothing else made sense. No known animal moved like that, looked like that. We tried to calm down, to rationalize what we'd seen. Maybe it was the shadows playing tricks on us. Maybe it was just a really big bear that looked weird in the bad light. But deep down, we all knew better. We drove back to town in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. When Dave dropped me off at my house, I remember him saying, "Don't tell anyone about this. They'll think we're crazy or on drugs or something." I nodded, knowing he was right. Who would believe us? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing rising up from beneath the tree, its massive body silhouetted against the headlights. I kept hearing that deep, guttural growl. I checked my window locks 3 times before I finally got into bed. The next day, we met up and talked about it again. In the daylight, it was easier to doubt, to convince ourselves we'd overreacted or misinterpreted what we'd seen, but none of us could fully dismiss it. The memory was too vivid, too detailed. We swore not to tell anyone else. Who would believe 3 teenagers claiming they saw Bigfoot? We'd be laughed out of town. So we kept it to ourselves, though it changed something between us. We shared this secret that set us apart from everyone else. About 2 months later, in October, I went back to that spot alone. I don't know what possessed me to do it. Curiosity, or maybe a need to prove to myself that it had really happened. It took me a while to find the dirt road again. It was much less intimidating in daylight, just a narrow, rutted path winding through the woods. I found the bridge and the creek, which was barely more than a trickle by then. The big oak tree was still there, ancient and imposing even in daylight. I spent hours searching the area, looking for footprints, broken branches, hair caught on bark, anything that might serve as evidence. But I found nothing. The forest had reclaimed any traces that might have been left behind. Standing there in those quiet woods, it was hard to connect this peaceful place with the terror I'd felt that night. But I knew what I'd seen, what we'd all seen. I never went back after that day. Dave, Chris, and I gradually drifted apart after high school. We never talked about that night again, at least not in any detail. It was like we'd made an unspoken agreement to let it fade away. But it never really did fade. Not for me. 41 years later, I still think about it. Still wonder what exactly we encountered on that summer night in 1982. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, always with a sense of recognition when the descriptions match what we saw. The height, the teardrop-shaped head, the incredible speed and strength. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I probably wouldn't believe it myself if someone else told me this story, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I'm driving on a dark, lonely road at night, I find myself scanning the trees, half afraid, half hoping to catch another glimpse of that impossible creature that forever changed my understanding of what might be out there, hidden in the New Hampshire forests. Story 11. I've debated for months whether I should post this. Even now, my hands shake a bit typing it out. What my family and I experienced isn't something we've shared with anyone, not even our closest friends. But I need to tell someone who might understand. So here goes. About 10 years ago, my husband and I bought this beautiful 30-acre property outside of Oxford, New York. It was our dream, getting away from town life, having space for our kids to grow up in nature, maybe raise some chickens, that whole thing. The property is mostly wooded with a creek running through it. For the first 4 years, everything was perfect. Our boys loved exploring the woods. We'd have bonfires in the summer, and we felt so lucky to have found this place. But something happened 4 years in that changed everything, and I've never been able to fully explain it to myself, let alone anyone else. It was a Tuesday afternoon in late September. The leaves were just starting to turn, and we'd had an unusually warm fall. I'd gone into town with my husband Jeff and our oldest son Ethan, who was 9 at the time, to run errands, grocery shopping, hardware store, the usual stuff. We were heading home around 4:30 p.m., so the sun was still up but starting to get lower. Our mailboxes are community style, all grouped together at this bend in the dirt road where the creek passes underneath through a culvert. It's about a quarter mile from our actual house. We always stop there on our way home to check for mail. It's just this normal thing we do. That day, Jeff pulled over and kept the truck running while he reached out to grab whatever was in our box. Ethan was in the back seat playing on his Nintendo DS. I was just sitting there, half daydreaming, looking out across the road toward the old Simmons property that borders ours. There's a barbed wire fence running along the property line there, all rusted and sagging in places, with thick brush growing up around it. Suddenly, Ethan said, "Mom, what's that?" His voice had this weird edge to it that immediately made me alert. I followed where he was pointing, across the road maybe 50 yards away. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just the fence, the brush, some trees beyond it. But then something moved and I realized there was something partially hidden in the thick brush beside the fence. I still remember the instant drop in my stomach when I realized what I was looking at wasn't just shadows or vegetation. This thing was huge, extraordinarily tall. I'd estimate at least 7, maybe 8 feet, and broad-shouldered, not like a human. The proportions were all wrong. It was covered in what looked like dark hair or fur, not black exactly, more like a deep brown black. What struck me most were its arms. They hung down so much lower than a human's would, almost to its knees. I must have made some kind of noise, because Jeff stopped shuffling through the mail and looked at me. "What?" he asked. I couldn't speak. I just stared. The thing was partially obscured by brush, but it was standing upright, completely still, just watching us. Then it shifted slightly, turning its head more directly toward our truck, and I saw its face. God, that face. It wasn't human. It had this flat, broad face under a low, sloping forehead, dark eyes set deep, but I couldn't make out details from that distance. The whole time, it just stared at us, not moving except for that slight turn of its head. I remember grabbing Jeff's arm so hard he flinched. "Drive," I whispered, "just drive." "What's wrong?" He started looking around, confused. "Drive!" I shouted, and Jeff, startled, put the truck in gear and pulled forward. We got maybe 20 feet when I suddenly said, "Wait, back up." Some stupid part of me needed to confirm what I'd seen wasn't just my imagination. Jeff, completely bewildered, backed up to the mailboxes again. We all looked over to the spot by the fence, but the creature was gone. All I could see was the brush shaking slightly near the fence line, like something had just pushed through it. "What the hell, Emma?" Jeff was annoyed now. "What are we looking at?" I couldn't find the words at first. Finally, I managed. There was something there, something big. Jeff squinted across the road. Probably just one of Johnson's cows that got out. They stand funny sometimes in the shadows. But I knew what I saw. Cows don't stand upright on two legs. Cows don't have arms that swing. Cows don't have those eyes that seem to look right into you. Ethan was quiet in the back seat, his game forgotten. "I saw it too, Dad," he said softly. We drove home in silence. I kept scanning the woods along the driveway, half expecting to see that thing again. But there was nothing. When we got to the house, I hurried Ethan inside while Jeff unloaded the groceries. I remember checking the locks on all the doors that night, something I'd never really bothered with before. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen over and over. I convinced myself it had to be a bear standing oddly, or maybe a person in dark clothing, but I knew better. What I saw had been neither human nor any animal I recognized. Over the next few weeks, things changed around our property. Subtle things at first. None of us wanted to be the one to walk out to the truck after dark. Our younger son, Ryan, who was 6 then, stopped playing as far from the house as he used to. Ethan, who had always loved exploring the woods, now stayed closer to the porch and the cleared area around our house. About 2 weeks after the sighting, I was up late doing bills around midnight when I heard something from the direction of the creek. It was a deep, rumbling growl, not like a dog or coyote, more resonant, deeper in pitch. I froze, pen in hand, and listened. The growl faded. Then I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps moving through dead leaves. Then silence. I didn't tell Jeff about it the next morning. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but later that week, Ethan came running in from feeding the chickens, white-faced and shaking. He said he'd heard heavy breathing near the woodpile while he was in the coop. He said it sounded like something big was standing just on the other side of the stacked logs, watching him. By the time he worked up the courage to look, whatever it was had gone. That fall and winter, I started noticing more unusual sounds around the property. Sometimes at dusk, I'd hear strange grunts coming from the woods. Occasionally, there'd be the distinct sound of branches snapping, not like a squirrel or raccoon moving through trees, but heavy breaks, like something substantial was pushing through. Once, around February, I heard what sounded like whistles, 3 short whistles that didn't sound like any bird I know, coming from the ridge behind our house. Our cat, Jasper, who had always been an avid hunter in the woods, disappeared that October. We never found him. For a while I tried to convince myself it was just wildlife, maybe a bear, or even a moose that had wandered south. But deep down, I knew. What we saw that day at the mailboxes wasn't any known animal. I've spent hours researching online, reading accounts from others, looking at reports of similar sightings in upstate New York. There aren't many, but they exist. The descriptions match what we saw: the height, the proportions, the way it moved. I believe what we encountered that day was what people call a Bigfoot or Sasquatch. We've never told our neighbors. We've never reported it to any authorities or research groups. Who would believe us? And honestly, part of me is afraid that acknowledging it publicly might somehow make things worse. Like maybe as long as we keep quiet about it, it keeps its distance. But it's still here. I'm sure of it. Last spring, I found a strange footprint near the creek, over 16 inches long with 5 toes, pressed deep into the mud, and sometimes, especially on still summer nights, I can feel something watching the house from the tree line. My husband has come around somewhat. He doesn't dismiss what I saw anymore, not after he heard those same heavy footsteps himself last winter while chopping wood. He came inside looking pale, put his axe away, and didn't go back out until morning. We've adapted, I guess. We don't let the kids play in the woods alone anymore. We installed more exterior lights around the property. We make sure to be inside before dark. But I still think about that day at the mailboxes often, the way it just stood there, watching us. The intelligence in its eyes. It wasn't threatening us. It could have approached the truck if it wanted to. It was just observing. Almost like it was as curious about us as we were terrified of it. 6 years have passed since that first sighting, and we're still here on the property. We've had no direct confrontations, but sometimes I wake up at night and hear something moving around outside, too heavy to be a deer, too deliberate to be random wildlife, and I lie there, heart pounding, wondering if it's standing outside our window, looking in at us the way it did that day by the fence. I don't know why I'm sharing this now. Maybe I just need someone to believe me. Maybe I need to know we're not the only ones who've experienced something like this. All I know is that our property is home to something else, something that was here long before us and will probably be here long after we're gone. And for now, we've reached a kind of uneasy coexistence that I pray never changes, because I've seen those eyes, and I know there's an intelligence behind them that understands far more than any animal should. Story 12. I've been debating whether to share this for weeks now. I'm not someone who believes in monsters or reads a bunch of paranormal stuff. I'm just a regular guy who loves hiking with my family around BC. But what happened to us last month has been keeping me up at night, and I need to get it off my chest. It was a Saturday in late September, perfect weather for a family hike. My wife Karen, our 12-year-old son Ethan, and our chocolate lab Rusty decided to explore a trail just off Highway 99 outside of Squamish. We'd heard the Conroy Service Road had some nice views and wasn't too challenging for a family outing. We drove up the service road until it got too rough for our SUV. Nothing crazy, just the typical logging road with too many potholes and fallen branches to risk our suspension. We parked in a small clearing and got our day packs ready. Karen packed some sandwiches and water bottles. I grabbed my hiking poles, and Ethan was in charge of Rusty's leash, though we let him off once we got walking. Rusty's well-trained and always stays within sight. The first 30 minutes were completely normal. The air was crisp, and the forest smelled like pine and earth. Rusty was having a blast running ahead, sniffing everything, then circling back to us. Ethan was in a good mood, pointing out different types of mushrooms growing alongside the trail. It was one of those perfect family moments, you know. Then everything changed. We'd hiked maybe 2 kilometers up the service road when Karen stopped to tie her shoe. Ethan and I paused a few steps ahead, and Rusty was about 10 meters in front of us, nose to the ground, following some interesting scent. That's when we heard it, this deep, powerful grunt or growl that echoed through the trees. It wasn't a sound I recognized, and I've heard plenty of wildlife in these woods over the years. It wasn't a bear's huffing or a cougar's scream. It was deeper, more guttural, almost like someone trying to clear their throat, but amplified 10 times, and with this primal quality that made the hair on my arm stand up. Karen froze mid-shoelace. "What was that?" she whispered. I scanned the forest, trying to locate the source. That's when I saw movement about 80 yards up the hill to our right. Something black moving between the trees. At first I thought it might be a bear, but it was running completely upright on two legs, too tall and too fast for a bear. It wasn't a deer either. The movement was all wrong. Whatever it was big and moving with purpose, weaving through the trees with shocking agility for its size. "Do you see that?" I asked Karen, pointing. By the time she looked, it had disappeared into the denser part of the forest, but she saw the trees still swaying from where it had passed. Then the smell hit us. I've smelled some nasty things in my life. Roadkill in summer heat, my son's hockey bag after a tournament. But this was different. It was sharp and sour, almost like rancid meat mixed with something musky and wild, the kind of smell that makes your stomach turn instantly. "Dad, what's that smell?" Ethan covered his nose with his sleeve, his eyes wide. Rusty had stopped dead in his tracks ahead of us. His ears were perked up, and he was staring into the forest where the movement had been. He wasn't growling or barking, just completely still, which was unusual for him. "It's probably just a bear," I said, trying to sound casual, but I didn't believe it. Bears don't run on two legs like that, and they don't smell like whatever that was. We stood there for maybe a minute, all of us silent, listening. The forest had gone quiet too. No birds, no squirrels chattering, just the sound of our breathing and the distant rush of wind through the treetops. "Should we head back?" Karen asked, her voice tense. I hesitated. I didn't want to scare Ethan, and honestly, I was curious. In all my years hiking around BC, I'd never seen anything like this. Part of me wanted to know what it was, even as another part was screaming to get back to the car. "Let's keep going a little further," I suggested, "but stay close together." Karen gave me that look, the one that says she thinks I'm being an idiot but is too polite to say it in front of our kid. But she nodded, and we continued walking, calling Rusty back to stay closer to us. We walked another 10 minutes, all of us on high alert. Ethan kept looking over his shoulder, and I noticed Karen had picked up a sturdy branch, carrying it like a club. The service road curved around a bend, and as we turned the corner, that smell hit us again, stronger this time. It was coming from further up the road, from around another bend about 100 meters ahead. Ethan tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, I don't feel good about this," he whispered. His face had gone pale, and I could see genuine fear in his eyes. That was enough for me. Whatever natural curiosity I had was overridden by the need to protect my family. "Okay, let's head back," I said, trying to sound calm. We turned around, and I noticed we were all walking faster than before, though no one mentioned it. No one wanted to be the one to admit they were scared. But our quickened pace said it all. We'd made it about halfway back to our vehicle when Rusty suddenly veered off the road, darting into the brush on our left. Before I could call him back, we heard a yelp, not pain exactly, but pure terror. Seconds later, Rusty came tearing out of the bushes, running so fast he nearly knocked Ethan over as he pressed himself against our legs, trembling from head to tail. I've never seen our dog like that. Rusty isn't easily frightened. He stood his ground against aggressive dogs 3 times his size at the park. But now he was shaking so badly, I could hear his teeth chattering, and he wouldn't stop whining, this high-pitched sound that made my skin crawl. "What happened, boy?" I knelt down to check him for injuries, but found nothing. No blood, no cuts, no sign he'd been attacked, just pure, unfiltered fear in his eyes. "Something scared him," Karen said, stating the obvious but clearly trying to process what was happening. I stared into the bushes where Rusty had disappeared. The foliage was thick, and I couldn't see more than a few feet in. Part of me wanted to investigate, to see what had terrified our dog so completely. But Rusty's reaction told me everything I needed to know. Whatever was in there wasn't something we wanted to encounter. "Let's go," I said, my voice firmer now. "Ethan, hold Rusty's leash tight." We practically jogged the rest of the way back to our vehicle. No one spoke. The only sounds were our breathing, our footsteps on the gravel road, and Rusty's occasional whimpers. The forest around us seemed to be watching, waiting. I kept scanning the trees, expecting to see that black figure again, but there was nothing. When we finally reached our SUV, Karen's hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get the key in the door. I took them from her and unlocked it, and we all piled in, Rusty practically diving into the back seat with Ethan. As I started the engine, I glanced in the rear-view mirror. The service road stretched behind us, empty and innocent-looking in the afternoon sun. But at the edge of the forest, where the shadows deepened, I swear I saw movement. Just a flicker, like something ducking back into the trees. And for a split second, I thought I saw two eyes reflecting the sunlight. Too high off the ground to be a normal animal. I reversed so fast, I nearly hit a stump, then spun the wheel and gunned it down the rough road, not caring about the suspension anymore. No one complained about my driving. It took us 15 minutes to reach the highway, and only when we merged with the normal traffic heading towards Squamish did I feel my heart rate beginning to slow. Karen looked at me, her face still pale. "What was that?" she asked quietly, making sure Ethan couldn't hear over the music I'd turned on to break the tense silence. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "A bear, maybe." But we both knew it wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. They don't make sounds like that, and they don't terrify dogs who have encountered bears before without issue. It's been 3 weeks since that day, and I still don't have answers. Rusty won't go near the forest edge behind our house anymore, which is strange for a dog who used to disappear into the trees for hours chasing squirrels. Ethan has had nightmares twice about the monster in the woods, though we never used that word around him. I've searched online for reports of strange sightings around Squamish. I've found a few vague stories, some mentions of Sasquatch territory, but nothing concrete, nothing that explains what we experienced. All I know is that something was out there on the Conroy service road, something that moved on 2 legs, made sounds no known animal makes, and gave off an odor I can still recall vividly if I close my eyes, something that wanted us gone from its territory. And I can promise you this, we won't be going back there. Some parts of the wilderness aren't meant for us, and whatever lives in those woods made that message crystal clear. Story 13. I've been debating whether to share this for years now. Most people I've told just laugh or say we were seeing things, but I know what I saw that night, and it still gives me chills thinking about it. This happened back in July of 2008, when I was 23 and living with my parents on their farm near Skio, Oregon. It was a warm summer evening, probably around 10 or 10:30. My boyfriend Marcus had come over after dinner. We'd been dating for about 8 months at that point. He drove an old Ford pickup, nothing fancy, just reliable. After hanging out inside for a while, we decided to step outside for some fresh air. My parents had already gone to bed, and the night was beautiful, with a nearly full moon lighting up the property. Our farm isn't huge, maybe 40 acres, with about half being open pasture land and the rest wooded. My dad kept a few cattle and grew hay on the cleared land. The property slopes downward toward the back where it meets the forest. That area always felt a bit, I don't know, unwelcoming. Even as a kid, I never liked playing back there. Marcus and I were just standing by his truck in the gravel driveway, talking about normal stuff, our plans for the weekend, maybe catching a movie. The moonlight was bright enough that we could see pretty far across the pasture without any flashlights. The air was still, with that summer night warmth that makes everything feel peaceful. I remember leaning against his truck, feeling the metal still warm from the day's heat. We weren't being loud or anything, just talking quietly, enjoying the night. Then, mid-sentence, Marcus suddenly stopped talking, his whole body tensed up. I followed his gaze out toward the lower corner of our property where the fence line meets the woods. At first, I couldn't see what he was looking at. Then I noticed something moving, something big. It's hard to describe exactly what I saw. There was this dark figure, really dark, moving incredibly fast across our open pasture. It was coming from the lower corner of the fence line and running straight toward the trees on the other side. The way it moved, That's what struck me first. It was upright, on two legs, but moving with this purpose. Not like a human jog or run. More fluid, more powerful. I remember grabbing Marcus's arm so hard he winced. Neither of us said anything. We just watched, frozen. This thing, whatever it was, had to be 7 or 8 feet tall. At least, its arms were swinging at its sides, but not like how a person's arms swing when they run. The proportions were all wrong. They seemed too long, and they moved with this odd rhythm that doesn't match how humans move. The pasture is about 300 yards across, and this thing covered that distance in what felt like seconds. But the strangest part, the part that still makes the hair on my neck stand up, was what happened right before it reached the tree line. It turned its head toward us. It didn't slow down or stop running, just turned its head while moving, and I swear it looked directly at us. I couldn't make out a face in the darkness and distance, but I felt its eyes. It knew we were there. It was acknowledging our presence. Then it disappeared into the timber. For what felt like forever, Marcus and I just stood there, barely breathing. Finally, he whispered, "Did you see that?" His voice was shaky. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak yet. My heart was racing so fast, I thought it might burst out of my chest. My hands were trembling, and I felt cold despite the warm night. "What the hell was that?" he finally asked, a bit louder. "I don't know," I managed to say, "but it wasn't a person." "No way that was a person," he agreed. "Too big, too fast." We debated for a minute about what to do. Part of me wanted to just get in his truck and drive away, but this was my home. I needed to tell someone, so we went inside, trying to be quiet but probably making more noise than we realized because we were so rattled. My mom must have still been awake reading because she came out of her bedroom right away, asking what was wrong. One look at our faces and she knew something had happened. We told her what we'd seen, trying to describe it as best we could. Mom's always been practical. She didn't dismiss us, but she didn't panic either. She grabbed a flashlight, one of those big, heavy mag lights, and said she was going to take a look. I begged her not to go out there, but she insisted. Marcus and I ended up following her outside, neither of us wanting to be left behind. We stood in the driveway while Mom walked out into the pasture, sweeping her flashlight back and forth. She went maybe 50 yards out, then came back, saying she didn't see anything unusual, no tracks, no broken fence, nothing. But the grass was tall in places, and the ground was pretty dry and hard after weeks without rain. It wouldn't necessarily show footprints. When we went back inside, Dad had woken up too. He listened to our story with this strange expression on his face. Not disbelief exactly, but not completely surprised either. He asked a few questions about exactly where we'd seen it and how it moved. Then he just nodded and said we should all get some sleep. I couldn't sleep at all that night. Marcus ended up staying over on the couch. Neither of us wanted him driving home alone after what we'd seen. I kept thinking about that thing turning to look at us, the deliberateness of it. It wasn't startled or scared, it was aware. That's the only word I can think of. It was aware of us watching it, and it wanted us to know. The next few days, I kept looking out the windows, especially toward dusk. I convinced Marcus to help me check the tree line where the thing had disappeared, but we didn't find anything conclusive. Just some broken branches that could have been caused by anything. Dad said a couple of the cattle seemed skittish, but that wasn't unusual in summer with coyotes around. After a few weeks, life kind of went back to normal. We didn't talk about it much, partly because people we told either thought we were making it up or suggested it was a bear, even though bears don't run upright across open fields. Or maybe someone in a costume playing a prank at 10:30 at night in the middle of nowhere, right? But the experience stayed with me. I started researching similar sightings in Oregon. There were more than I expected, especially in the heavily forested areas. Some descriptions matched exactly what we'd seen: the height, the way it moved, how fast it could run. I'd almost convinced myself that maybe we had just seen a very tall person running across our property until something happened about 3 years later that changed everything. Our neighbor, Mrs. Lawson, lives about a quarter mile behind our place. Their property backs up to the same forest as ours. One October evening in 2011, she and her husband were out deer hunting on their land. We saw them at the local hardware store a few days later, and Mrs. Lawson pulled me aside. "Jennifer," she said quietly, "can I ask you something strange?" When I nodded, she continued, "Did you ever see anything unusual on your property? Anything that couldn't be explained?" My stomach dropped. I asked her what she meant, and she hesitated before telling me what had happened. She and her husband had been in their hunting blind at dusk. Suddenly, she noticed a strong, musky smell. Like wet dog mixed with something rotten, is how she described it. Then she saw movement between the trees about 40 yards away. She said she saw a tall shape, covered in dark brown hair, moving upright between the trees. When she pointed it out to her husband, he said he could smell the same odor and heard branches snapping, but the light was too dim for him to get a clear look. Mrs. Lawson said she'd never believed in that Bigfoot nonsense before, but now she wasn't sure. The way she described what she saw, the height, the movement, the color, it matched exactly what Marcus and I had seen that night. That conversation convinced me. What we saw that night in 2008 wasn't a person or a bear or our imagination. It was something else, something that isn't supposed to exist according to science, but something that people have been reporting seeing in these forests for decades. I still live in Oregon, though not on my parents' farm anymore. Marcus and I eventually broke up for unrelated reasons, but we still check in with each other every now and then. He hasn't forgotten that night either. Sometimes when I'm driving through rural areas at dusk, I find myself scanning the tree lines, half expecting to see that tall figure again. The thing that still haunts me isn't just what we saw, but how it looked at us. That deliberate head turn, that acknowledgement. Most wildlife runs away from humans. This thing didn't seem afraid at all. It was just passing through, aware of us, but unconcerned, like it knew this land better than we did, like it had been there long before us, and would remain long after we were gone. I've tried explaining what I saw to a few close friends over the years, but unless you've experienced something like this yourself, it's hard to understand the impact it has. It's not just about seeing something unexpected. It's about having your entire worldview challenged in an instant. There are things in these forests that we don't understand, that most people will never see, and maybe that's for the best. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through the trees at night, occasionally crossing open spaces when it thinks no one is watching. And sometimes, on quiet nights when I can't sleep, I wonder if it remembers us too. The two humans who stood frozen by a pickup truck, witnessing something they weren't supposed to see. Story 14. I'm still not sure I can fully explain what I saw that evening in '82. Most people don't believe me when I tell them. I've spent years trying to make sense of it myself, wondering if my teenage eyes were playing tricks on me. But Tracy saw it too, and we've never wavered in what we encountered that day on the Gold Coast. It was late November, just before summer holidays were about to start. Tracy and I were both 15 and inseparable since primary school. Her family had moved to a new housing development called Sunrise Estates about a month earlier, and I was visiting her for the weekend. The estate was only half built back then, finished houses on one side and cleared lots waiting for construction on the other. That Friday had been brutally hot. One of those sticky Queensland days where the humidity makes your clothes cling to your skin. We'd spent most of the afternoon at Tracy's new pool, but by evening we were restless. Her parents were having dinner with neighbors, leaving us to entertain ourselves. Around 6, with the sun starting to set, Tracy suggested we explore the undeveloped section of the estate. "There's this little creek back there," she said, toweling her chlorine-soaked hair. "Saw some weird birds there yesterday." I wasn't particularly interested in birds, but anything was better than watching whatever boring Friday night TV show her parents had recorded. So we changed into shorts and t-shirts and headed out, Tracy leading the way through her backyard and toward the undeveloped lots. The contrast between the finished and unfinished parts of the estate was stark. One moment we were walking past manicured lawns and concrete driveways. The next, we were trudging through knee-high grass that had grown wild after the land was cleared. The developers had bulldozed most of the trees months ago, but hadn't started building yet, so nature was reclaiming the space with tall grass, weeds, and scrubby bushes. The sun was dipping lower, casting long shadows across the field. There was still plenty of light, but that golden-orange glow made everything look different. I remember being struck by how quiet it was away from the houses, just the occasional car in the distance and cicadas starting their evening chorus. "Watch out for snakes," Tracy warned, stepping carefully through the grass. "Dad says there's plenty of eastern browns out here." That put me on edge immediately. Eastern browns are among Australia's deadliest snakes, and I started watching the ground more carefully, regretting that we'd worn shorts instead of jeans. The grass wasn't uniformly tall. There were patches where it reached our waists, and other areas where it was shorter, trampled down by previous explorers or work vehicles. We were about 200 meters from the houses when Tracy pointed toward a depression in the land ahead. "That's where the creek is. It's mostly dry now, but there's still some water pools." We angled toward it, both of us walking more carefully as the grass got thicker. The ground sloped gently downward toward the creek bed, and the grass in this section was particularly high, well above our waists in places. The setting sun cast strange shadows through the stalks, and I remember feeling slightly uneasy. Not scared exactly, just alert. We were maybe 30 meters from the creek when I noticed something odd. There was a section of grass ahead that seemed to be moving differently from the rest. While the surrounding grass swayed slightly in the evening breeze, this patch seemed to be compressing, like something was pressing down on it from above. I was about to point it out to Tracy when she suddenly stopped walking. Her hand shot out to grab my arm, and I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Did you see that?" she whispered. "See what?" "Something moved over there." She pointed toward the same patch of grass I'd been watching. We stood frozen for a moment, both staring at the spot. The sun was at that annoying angle where it was right in our eyes when we looked in that direction, making it hard to see clearly. "Probably just a wallaby," I suggested, though wallabies weren't common in that area. "Or someone's dog got out." Tracy shook her head. "It was bigger than a dog." We stood there debating whether to continue or turn back when curiosity got the better of us. We decided to creep closer, moving slowly and staying together. The grass was making soft swishing sounds against our legs as we pushed through it. I remember the smell of it too, dry and slightly sweet in the evening heat. We'd gotten perhaps 10 steps closer when the grass directly in front of us shifted dramatically. There was a definite movement, not just grass blowing in the wind, but something solid changing position. We froze again, standing shoulder to shoulder, neither wanting to be the first to suggest retreating. "Hello," Tracy called out, her voice slightly higher than normal. "Is someone there?" No response, but the grass stopped moving. That's when I suggested we should maybe circle around it, approaching from a different angle where the sun wasn't blinding us. Tracy nodded, and we began stepping carefully to our right, trying to keep our eyes fixed on the spot where we'd seen movement. The ground was uneven, with hidden dips and rises that made walking tricky. I was so focused on not twisting an ankle that I wasn't looking directly ahead when Tracy suddenly screamed, a sound so primal and terrified that I felt it in my bones before I even processed it with my ears. "It has eyes! It has eyes!" she shrieked, grabbing my arm with fingers that dug in painfully. I looked up and saw it. Less than 3 feet away from us, partially hidden in a depression where the grass grew especially tall, was something. something that absolutely should not have been there. My first thought, absurdly, was that someone had abandoned a child wrapped in a fur coat. It was huddled down, arms wrapped around its legs, curled almost into a ball, but this was no child. The creature was covered completely in hair, a dull, mousy brown color that blended perfectly with the dried grass. Its body was stocky, with broad shoulders and a chest that seemed too wide for its height. And despite being hunched over, I could tell it wasn't tall, maybe 4 feet at most, if it had stood upright. But it was the eyes that had made Tracy scream. They were fixed on us, dark, alert, and undeniably intelligent, human-like but not human. They were set in a face that was flat and broad, mostly obscured by the same brown hair that covered its body, but visible enough to see the unmistakable expression: fear. That's what struck me most in that frozen moment. The creature was terrified of us. It was trying to make itself smaller, hunching down in what I now recognize as a defensive posture. It wasn't threatening us. It was hoping we wouldn't notice it. Time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other. I don't know if it lasted 2 seconds or 20. I could hear Tracy's panicked breathing beside me, feel her nails digging into my arm. I couldn't move. I couldn't even blink. The creature didn't make a sound, not a growl, not a whimper, nothing. It just watched us with those eyes, its body completely still except for the subtle rise and fall of breathing. Then Tracy screamed again, a wordless shriek that broke the spell. She yanked my arm and started running back toward the houses. I stumbled after her, my body responding before my brain had fully processed what was happening. "Run!" she yelled unnecessarily. We were already running, crashing through the grass with no concern for snakes or uneven ground. I glanced back once, half expecting to see the creature chasing us, but there was nothing visible behind us, just waving grass and the orange glow of the setting sun. We didn't stop running until we reached the paved road of the development. My lungs were burning, and Tracy was bent over, hands on her knees, gasping for breath. Her face was white as a sheet. "Did you see it?" she panted. "Did you fucking see it?" I nodded, unable to form words yet. "What was that?" she demanded, looking back toward the field as if expecting the creature to emerge onto the road. "I don't know," I managed to say. My heart was still pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Some kind of animal. But even as I said it, I knew that wasn't right. It wasn't like any animal I'd ever seen or heard of. It was something else entirely. It looked... Tracy struggled to find the words. It looked almost human, but not. That was exactly it. The proportions were wrong for a human, but too right for an animal. The intelligence in those eyes was unmistakable, and the way it had curled up, arms around its legs, that was a human gesture. We debated going to get Tracy's parents, but what would we say? That we saw some hairy creature hiding in the grass. They'd think we were making it up for attention or had seen someone's pet. And there was another factor, a strange reluctance I felt to expose the creature. It had seemed so vulnerable, so frightened. It was more scared of us than we were of it, I said quietly. Tracy looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Are you kidding? That thing was... it was..." She shuddered visibly. "I'm never going back there again." We eventually went back to her house, jumping at every sound, constantly looking over our shoulders. We spent the rest of the evening locked in her room, whispering theories about what we'd seen. A deformed person? Some unknown animal? A science experiment gone wrong? None of the explanations felt right. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those dark, frightened eyes staring at me from a hairy face. I kept thinking about how it had been hiding, how it had curled into itself when discovered. It hadn't threatened us. It had just wanted to remain hidden. The next morning, Tracy refused to go anywhere near the undeveloped lots. I didn't push it, but part of me wanted to go back to see if the creature was still there. Not that I would have gone alone, no chance of that, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Before I went home on Sunday, Tracy made me swear not to tell anyone. "They'll think we're crazy," she insisted. or liars. I agreed, though I broke that promise years later when I told my husband. He listened politely, but clearly didn't believe me. I can't blame him. It sounds impossible, even to me sometimes. Over the years, I've done research, trying to make sense of what we saw. It wasn't until I was in my 20s that I came across stories of the Yowie, Australia's version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. The descriptions matched: hairy, humanoid creatures of various sizes, often described as shy and reclusive. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what we saw that evening was a young Yowie, perhaps separated from its family, perhaps just passing through as the housing development encroached on its territory. Tracy and I don't talk about it much anymore. She moved interstate after high school, and we gradually lost touch, except for occasional phone calls. The last time we discussed it, maybe 10 years ago, she admitted she still has nightmares about those eyes watching her from the grass. I don't have nightmares, but I do wonder. That housing estate is completely built up now. The creek has been channeled underground, the wild fields replaced with houses and streets and parks. Where did the creature go? Are there others? Do they still exist in the shrinking wild spaces of the Gold Coast? I'll never know for sure what we encountered that November evening in '82. But of one thing I remain certain. For a few breathless moments, we looked into the eyes of something unknown to science, something that didn't belong in our orderly human world. And it looked back at us, just as surprised to see us as we were to see it. Udintu, Story 15. But I've been holding this story in for 13 years now, and I need to finally tell someone. My wife Linda and I experienced something in 2010 that completely changed how we view the wilderness. I know this might sound crazy to some of you, but I swear every word is true. It was early June, and Linda and I had planned a camping trip to Sabine National Forest near Toledo Bend in East Texas. We both needed to get away from work stress. I was dealing with a difficult project deadline, and Linda had been pulling extra shifts at the hospital. This was supposed to be our chance to disconnect and enjoy some peace and quiet. We specifically chose a spot that was pretty isolated. You had to follow this dirt trail along the shoreline that eventually turned inland, and it wasn't a place many people knew about. I'd found it years earlier on a fishing trip with my dad. The isolation was exactly what we wanted, or so we thought at the time. We arrived around 2 in the afternoon, and the spot was just as I remembered. A small clearing surrounded by tall pines with enough space for our truck and gear. The nearest campsite had to be at least a mile away. We couldn't see or hear anyone else, which felt perfect. I backed our F-150 into position so we could sleep in the truck bed under the stars. We'd done this many times before, laid out our sleeping bags in the bed of the truck with just the night sky above us. The afternoon was spent setting up our little camp. Nothing fancy, just a folding table, couple of chairs, and a portable grill. Linda had marinated some chicken the night before, and we were looking forward to having that for dinner with some corn on the cob and potatoes. Simple camping food, but it always tastes better outdoors. The evening was perfect, warm but not too hot, with a slight breeze coming off the water. We grilled the chicken, had a couple beers, and watched the sunset through the trees. It was exactly the peaceful evening we needed. After dinner, I gathered all our trash, chicken bones, corn cobs, empty beer cans, napkins, and put everything in 2 white plastic grocery bags. I'm always careful about food waste when camping because I know it can attract animals. We'd had raccoons get into our stuff on previous trips, so I made sure to tie the bags tightly. I found a good tree about 30 feet from our truck and tossed a rope over a branch that was about 9 feet high. I tied the 2 white bags to the rope and hoisted them up, figuring that would keep any critters from getting to them until morning, when we could properly dispose of them. The bags were clearly visible from our truck, just white spots hanging against the darkening forest. By 10 o'clock, we were tired and decided to turn in. We crawled into our sleeping bags in the truck bed, leaving the tailgate down because it was such a nice night. The forest was incredibly quiet, except for the occasional hoot of an owl or the distant splash of something in the water. We fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know exactly what time it was when Linda nudged me awake, probably around midnight. Her hand was gripping my arm tightly, and when I turned to look at her, I could see the fear in her eyes even in the darkness. "James," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "something's moving around out there." I froze and listened. At first I didn't hear anything, but then I noticed a strange absence of normal forest sounds. No insects chirping, no rustling of leaves, just an unnatural stillness. Then I saw it. Between us and the tree where I'd hung our trash, a massive silhouette was moving. The moon was bright enough that I could make out the outline of something tall and wide, moving on two legs. My first irrational thought was that another camper had wandered into our sight, but this figure was too big, too broad to be human. The figure moved with an eerie silence. No snapping twigs, no rustling leaves. It was as if it knew exactly where to place each step. I held my breath as it approached the tree with our trash bags. Without any strain or jumping, it simply reached up with one arm and pulled down the plastic bag I had hung 9 feet off the ground. I'm 6 feet tall, and I had to throw a rope over that branch and hoist the bags up. Whatever this was just casually reached up and took it down like it was nothing. I whispered to Linda to crawl into the cab of the truck and honk the horn. I thought the noise might scare it off. She slid forward as quietly as possible, climbed through the back window into the cab, and pressed on the horn. The loud blare cut through the silence of the forest, and the creature turned its head toward us. That moment is burned into my memory. It didn't bolt or flinch like a startled animal would. It just slowly turned its head, as if merely acknowledging our presence. I couldn't make out any facial features in the darkness, just the massive silhouette with that trash bag in hand. Then, with the same deliberate, unhurried movements, it simply walked off into the woods, disappearing among the trees. It stayed completely upright the entire time, moving with what I can only describe as purposeful confidence. Linda crawled back to me, and we sat there in stunned silence, straining to hear. After a few minutes, we heard the sound of plastic tearing and what sounded like chewing coming from maybe 50 yards into the forest. Whatever it was eating our leftover chicken. "What the hell was that?" Linda whispered, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I replied honestly. I was trying to rationalize what we'd just seen. A bear? No. Bears don't walk exclusively on 2 legs for that long, and its proportions were all wrong. A person in a costume, out here miles from anywhere in the middle of the night. It made no sense. We sat there, too afraid to move, too stunned to think clearly. About 30 minutes passed, and I had started to think maybe it was gone for good. I was just about to suggest we pack up and leave when I saw it again. The same tall figure emerging from the trees, heading straight for our campsite. Linda's hand found mine and squeezed so hard it hurt. We watched as the creature walked directly to the tree again and just as easily as before, reached up and took down the second trash bag. Again, it moved with that same steady, unhurried pace, as if our presence wasn't even a concern. This time it paused for a moment after taking the bag, and I swear it looked directly at us. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I could feel its gaze. Then it turned and walked back into the forest. "We need to go." "Now," I whispered to Linda once the figure disappeared. We didn't wait to hear the second round of chewing. Moving as quickly and quietly as possible, we grabbed our essential belongings and threw them into the cab of the truck. I left the table, chairs, and cooler behind. They weren't worth the risk of spending another minute there. I started the engine, flipped on the headlights, and began driving down the dirt trail. In the rearview mirror, I kept expecting to see something following us, but there was nothing but darkness. We drove until we reached a pull-off area near the interstate, a place with lights and the occasional passing car. We parked there and spent the rest of the night sitting upright in the cab, jumping at every sound. Neither of us slept. When daylight finally came, we debated going back for our abandoned gear. But the memory of that tall figure so casually taking our trash was enough to convince us it wasn't worth it. We drove home, exhausted and shaken. In the days that followed, we tried to make sense of what we'd seen. Linda searched online for reports of bear sightings in the area, but nothing matched what we'd witnessed. I called a ranger station and vaguely asked about large wildlife in the Sabine National Forest, but the ranger just mentioned the usual: deer, wild pigs, the occasional black bear. I never explicitly mentioned what we saw because I was afraid of sounding crazy, but the more I thought about it, the more certain characteristics stood out. How it moved exclusively on two legs, how much taller it was than me, and I'm 6 feet tall, how easily it reached the high-hung trash, and how it moved with that casual confidence, neither aggressive nor particularly concerned about our presence. We've never returned to that camping spot. Actually, we haven't been camping at all since then. Linda suggested a trip to Big Bend last year, but I made up an excuse about work being too busy. The truth is, I can't shake the feeling that if we go back into the woods, that thing might be there, watching and waiting. Sometimes I wonder if anyone else has had a similar experience in that area. I've never been a believer in cryptids or Bigfoot or any of that stuff, but what else could explain what we saw? It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a person, and it certainly wasn't any known animal that should be wandering around East Texas. The memory of that night still makes my skin crawl, not because the creature was overtly threatening, but because of how utterly unconcerned it was by our presence, as if we were just minor characters in its territory, like we were the ones who were out of place, not it. I don't expect anyone to believe this story. Hell, sometimes I wonder if I'd believe it if someone else told it to me. But I know what we saw, and 13 years later, I still have no explanation for what happened that night in Sabine National Forest. Story 16. I still can't believe what happened that night. I'm writing this partly to process it all, and partly because I need to tell someone who won't think I'm crazy. I've never been the type to believe in monsters or cryptids or whatever, but what happened at Hannah's house changed everything for me. This all went down last month when I was staying with my best friend Hannah at her place outside Forks, Washington. If you've never been there, it's basically the definition of middle of nowhere, dense forest everywhere, hardly any streetlights, and the kind of darkness at night that swallows everything. Hannah's house sits on this little clearing surrounded by woods, with this massive oak tree near the road that always gave me the creeps. I'm 16, and I've known Hannah since elementary school. I was staying with her for the weekend while my parents were out of town. We'd done this a million times before, nothing unusual about it. Her house is this cozy two-story place with a long gravel driveway that winds through the trees before opening up to their yard. About 2 weeks before everything went down, Hannah and I were sitting on her front porch around dusk. We were just talking about school drama when I noticed something weird. The oak tree at the end of her driveway, it's this ancient thing with branches that twist up like fingers. Something moved in it, not like a squirrel or a bird. Something big. "Did you see that?" I whispered, grabbing Hannah's arm. She nodded, her eyes wide. "What was it?" We stared at the tree for another 10 minutes, but whatever it was had gone still or disappeared. We tried to laugh it off as probably just a bear or something, but deep down, I knew bears don't climb trees like that. Not trees with branches that high up. Fast forward to that Friday night. Hannah's parents both work late shifts at the hospital in Port Angeles, so we had the house to ourselves until around midnight. We were watching horror movies, ironically enough, when Hannah suddenly paused the TV. "We should go check out that tree," she said. My stomach immediately knotted up. Why would we do that? "Because it's been bugging us for weeks. Don't you want to know what we saw?" I didn't. Not really, but I also didn't want Hannah thinking I was scared, so I reluctantly agreed. It was around 9 o'clock, pitch black outside. The rational part of my brain kept saying it was probably nothing, maybe a raccoon or possum. The irrational part was screaming at me to stay inside. We grabbed flashlights and I got my car keys. I have this old Honda Civic my parents got me when I turned 16. Nothing fancy, but the headlights worked great. Our plan was simple: drive down the driveway, shine the high beams on the tree, and see if anything was there. The temperature had dropped to maybe 40 degrees, and a light mist hung in the air, making halos around my headlights as we slowly crept down the gravel driveway. My hands were sweating on the steering wheel despite the cold. Hannah kept fidgeting with the radio, not actually turning it on, just nervous energy. "Stop here," Hannah said when we were about 30 feet from the oak. "I put the car in park but left the engine running, just in case we needed to get out of there fast." My instincts were screaming at me by this point. "Turn on the high beams," Hannah whispered, as if whatever might be out there could hear us through the closed windows. I flicked on the high beams, and that's when everything changed. The bright light cut through the mist and illuminated the oak tree. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just branches, leaves, normal tree stuff, but then Hannah gasped and pointed upward. There, about 10 feet off the ground, nestled in the crook where two massive branches met the trunk, was something enormous. It had light grey fur that looked matted and rough, a massive head, and shoulders so wide they seemed to stretch across the entire width of the trunk. The thing that struck me most was that there wasn't a visible neck. The head just seemed to sit directly on those massive shoulders. "What the fuck is that?" I whispered, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out. Hannah didn't answer. She was frozen, staring up at the creature. The worst part was when it moved. It wasn't startled by our lights. It was adjusting, shifting its position like it was getting ready to climb down or jump down. The movement was so deliberate, so intelligent. This wasn't an animal reacting on instinct. This thing was thinking. As it shifted, I could make out part of its face in the beam of the headlights. It had this pronounced brow line, thick and heavy over eyes I couldn't quite see. The face was both human-like and not human at all. That's what made it so terrifying. The familiarity mixed with something completely alien. Hannah suddenly screamed, "Drive! Sophia, drive!" I slammed the car into reverse and hit the gas so hard we fishtailed on the gravel. Rocks pinged against the undercarriage as I spun the wheel, turning us around in a panic. I didn't even look in the rearview mirror. I couldn't. I was convinced that if I did, I'd see that thing dropping from the tree and running after us. We tore back up the driveway, the car bouncing violently over every bump. I only slowed down when we reached the house, skidding to a stop right by the front door. We bolted inside, locked every door, and closed all the blinds. "Did you see its face?" Hannah was shaking, pacing back and forth in the living room. "Did you see it?" I nodded, unable to form words for a minute. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. What was that thing? A bear? It couldn't be a bear, right? I finally managed to say, even though I knew damn well it wasn't a bear. "That was not a bear," Hannah said firmly. "Bears don't sit in trees like that. They don't have faces like that." We spent the rest of the night huddled in Hannah's bedroom with all the lights on. Neither of us slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle of branches against the windows made us jump. We kept imagining that thing making its way to the house, trying to get in. I've never been so terrified in my life. When morning finally came, we were exhausted but determined to check out the tree in daylight. Part of me hoped we'd find nothing, that it had all been our imagination or the shadows playing tricks on us, but the other part needed proof that I wasn't going crazy. After a quick breakfast, we couldn't really eat. We walked down the driveway. It felt safer in the daylight, but I still kept looking over my shoulder. When we reached the oak tree, we scanned the branches first. Nothing there, just an ordinary tree in the morning light. Then Hannah pointed to the ground beneath it. "Look." The soil was soft from recent rain, and there, pressed clearly into the mud, were footprints. Not human footprints, and definitely not bear tracks. They were enormous, easily 16 inches long, with 5 distinct toes. They were deeper at the heel, suggesting whatever made them was heavy. Really heavy. But what freaked me out even more was what looked like a handprint pushed into the soil near the base of the tree. It was like a human hand, but massive, with fingers that seemed too long, like it had braced itself when it jumped down from the tree. "It was here," I whispered. "It was really here." We took photos on our phones, though they didn't capture just how unnerving those prints were in person. The size, the depth, the way the soil was compressed, no normal animal could have made those marks. When Hannah's parents finally got home around 1 in the afternoon, we were still shaken. We debated whether to tell them, worried they'd think we were making it up or had gotten too caught up in horror movies. But we needed to tell someone. To our shock, they weren't skeptical at all. Hannah's dad exchanged this look with her mom that made my stomach drop. "You've seen it too, haven't you?" Hannah asked, her voice barely audible. Her dad sighed and sat down at the kitchen table. "About 4 months ago, your mom and I were coming home late from work. Something was in that tree. We thought it might be, well, we weren't sure what it was. We've heard it at night sometimes," Hannah's mom added quietly. "Near the tree, breaking branches, making these sounds that they're not from any animal around here." "Why didn't you say anything?" Hannah demanded. "We didn't want to scare you girls," her dad explained, "and we hoped it would move on. This area has had stories for generations. Most people don't talk about it." I felt cold all over. Stories about what? Neither of Hannah's parents would say the word, but they didn't have to. We all knew what we were talking about. Sasquatch, Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it, the thing that supposedly doesn't exist. "I'm keeping the yard lights on every night from now on," Hannah's mum said firmly. "And you girls need to stay away from that oak tree after dark. No exceptions. It's been a month, and I still can't stop thinking about what we saw. I've done research online, read accounts from other people in the Pacific Northwest who've seen similar things. So many of these stories match what we experienced. The size, the way it moved, those intelligent eyes. What haunts me most is wondering how many other people in Forks know about these creatures but choose to stay silent. How many other families have their own oak trees with watchers in the branches? How many other teenagers have driven down dark driveways and seen something they can't explain? I haven't been back to Hannah's house after dark since that night. I don't think I ever will. Some things, once seen, can't be unseen, and sometimes the monsters in the woods aren't just stories to scare children. Sometimes they're watching you from the branches of an old oak tree, waiting for the sun to go down. Story 17. Have you never told anyone the full story about what I saw that night? It's been 3 months, but I still can't stop thinking about it. I get these flashes while I'm driving now, especially on country roads when it's dark, where I'll check my rearview mirror just to make sure nothing's following me. I know how this sounds, but I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. It happened in late August, outside of Luguti, Indiana. If you've never been there, it's this tiny place about 20 minutes from Bloomington, basically just farms, a gas station, and a whole lot of nothing. I was driving home from my buddy Mike's place around 11:30 at night. We'd been watching the Colts preseason game and having a few beers, though I'd stopped drinking hours before. The weather was clear that night, warm but not sticky like it gets in July. There was this big, almost full moon hanging low in the sky, so bright it cast shadows on the fields. I remember thinking how peaceful it all looked. I had my windows rolled down a bit, just enjoying the night air and the sound of crickets. My headlights were the only ones on that stretch of County Road 45. It's this narrow 2-lane road that cuts through cornfields and patches of woods. I know that road like the back of my hand. Been driving it since I got my license at 16. That night, I was going about 55, taking it easy since there are some sharp curves, and the occasional deer likes to jump out. Around 11:45, I started slowing down for this bend that comes right before an open stretch. That's when I saw it. About 50 yards ahead, something moved onto the road from the right side. At first I thought it was a deer. We get tons of them around here. But my brain immediately registered that whatever this was, it was way too big to be a deer. And it wasn't moving like one either. This thing crossed the entire width of the road in what felt like 3 or 4 seconds. The road's not narrow. It's a standard 2-lane country road, and this creature covered it in just a few strides. There was something about the way it moved that made my skin crawl. It wasn't lumbering or clumsy. It moved with purpose, with this fluid, almost graceful motion that seemed impossible for something so massive. I instinctively hit the brakes, slowing to maybe 20 miles an hour. The thing was illuminated in my headlights for just a few seconds, but what I saw is burned into my memory. It was tall. I'm talking 7, maybe 7.5 feet tall. Its body was covered in this reddish-brown hair that looked different lengths depending on where it was. The hair on its arms was longer, almost shaggy, while the hair on its back and legs seemed shorter. Speaking of its arms, they were long, unnaturally long. They hung down past its knees. The proportions were all wrong for a human, but didn't match any animal I've ever seen either. And I've hunted these woods since I was 12. I know what bears look like, what deer look like, what every animal native to Indiana looks like. This wasn't any of those things. I couldn't make out its face. It was in shadow, and everything happened so fast, but I could see enough of its silhouette to know it was walking upright, completely bipedal, with broad shoulders tapering down to a narrower waist. If I had to guess, this thing weighed at least 350 pounds, maybe 400. What happened next is what really messes with me. On the left side of the road was a barbed wire fence, about 4 feet high. This fence separates the road from one of the Johnsons' cornfields. The corn was tall that time of year, maybe 7 feet high. This creature approached the fence, and I expected it to tear through it or climb over awkwardly. Instead, it did something that made my blood run cold. It placed its left hand, and I'm saying hand, not paw, flat on the top wire of the fence, and in one smooth motion, it jumped over. No running start, no struggle. It just cleared it, like it was stepping over a garden hose. I hit the brakes completely at that point, coming to a stop right where it had crossed. I could see the cornfield moving as whatever it was pushed through, heading away from the road. The corn stalks were swaying, but there was no sound. That's another thing that struck me as strange. This massive creature made virtually no noise, no grunting, no heavy breathing, nothing breaking or crashing, just silence. I sat there for maybe 2 minutes, engine idling, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I remember feeling this weird mix of fascination and absolute terror. I grew up hearing stories about strange things in these woods. Every small town has them, but I never put any stock in that stuff until that night. Eventually, I gathered my courage and decided to get the hell out of there. I hit the gas pretty hard and didn't slow down until I reached the main highway. When I got home, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying those few seconds over and over in my mind, trying to rationalize what I'd seen. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd seen a bear. Had to be, right? But Indiana doesn't have a native bear population, and the occasional black bear that wanders in from Michigan doesn't match what I saw. Black bears don't stand 7 feet tall. They don't have reddish-brown hair, and they sure as hell don't place their paw on a fence and hop over it like they're out for an evening stroll. I thought about going back to check for tracks or hair on the fence, but something kept me away. Fear, I guess. Or maybe the knowledge that finding evidence would confirm what I saw wasn't normal, and not finding any would make me question my own sanity. A week later, I worked up the nerve to casually ask Mike if he'd ever heard of anyone seeing strange things on County Road 45. He laughed and started talking about the Luguti Leaper, apparently some local legend about a creature that jumps fences and steals chickens. I laughed it off, but inside I felt sick. I'd never heard that story before, and now it seemed too close to what I'd seen. The thing that really gets to me about the whole experience was how deliberate the creature seemed. It wasn't running away in fear. It wasn't acting aggressively. It was just passing through, like it had somewhere to be, and the road was simply in its way. There was an intelligence to its movements that I can't explain. I've spent my entire life in these woods. I've hunted, fished, camped and hiked through every part of this county. I know what belongs here and what doesn't. This thing didn't belong. Since that night, I've been doing research. I've gone down internet rabbit holes reading about similar sightings across the Midwest. Some people call these things Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others have regional names for them. I don't know what to call what I saw. I just know it was real, and it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I recognize. I've also been avoiding that stretch of road after dark. I take the long way around now, adding 15 minutes to my drive. My wife thinks I'm being ridiculous, but I can't bring myself to drive past that spot when the sun's down. The few times I've had to drive it during daylight, I find myself slowing down at that curve, eyes scanning the tree line and the cornfield beyond the fence. One detail keeps coming back to me. When the creature placed its hand on the fence, I noticed it didn't grab the wire. It laid its palm flat on top, like it knew the barbs would hurt it. That suggests reasoning, planning, awareness. That's what scares me the most, I think. Not just that this thing exists, but that it thinks. I've tried to convince myself that the moonlight and shadows played tricks on me, that maybe it was just a particularly large deer or even a person in some kind of costume. But then I remember how it moved, how effortlessly it cleared that fence, how silently it disappeared into the corn. No human moves like that. No animal I know moves like that. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced I can hear something moving outside our house. Our property backs up to a small wooded area, and on nights when the moon is bright, I find myself staring out the window, watching the tree line, half expecting to see that silhouette again. I bought a security camera for our backyard last week. My wife thinks it's because of the break-ins over in Ellettsville, and I haven't corrected her. How do you tell your spouse that you're afraid some 7-foot creature might come walking out of the woods? There's a part of me that wants to go back to that spot with a friend to see if we can find any evidence. Another part never wants to set foot near there again. I don't know what I would do if I actually found proof of what I saw. Would I tell someone who would believe me? I keep thinking about how that thing just disappeared into the cornfield. The corn's been harvested now. The fields are empty. Where did it go? Does it live in the deeper woods beyond? Is it still out there, crossing roads in the dead of night when it thinks no one is watching? I used to laugh at people who claimed they saw things in the woods. Used to think they were attention seekers or had had too much to drink. Now I find myself wondering how many of them were telling the truth. How many others have seen what I saw and kept quiet for fear of ridicule. I don't know what I'm looking for by sharing this. Validation. Answers. Maybe I just needed to tell someone who won't immediately think I'm crazy. All I know is that what I saw that night on County Road 45 wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't supposed to be real, but it was. And no matter how much I try to rationalize it away, I know what I saw. That reddish-brown hair, those impossibly long arms. The way it placed its hand on that fence and jumped over like it was nothing. The silence, the deliberate movements. It was real. It happened, and I haven't been able to shake the feeling that someday I'm going to see it again.